2024. Could I ask that phones and other devices are switched to silent, please? So welcome everybody. I particularly want to say a special welcome to Assistant Chief Constable Ian Drummond-Smith, who joins us for his first meeting. He is the new ACC Territorial Policing. So I look forward to working with you, Ian, over the next months and years. And similarly also, this is actually, although she's not physically present, I think she's on Teams, Steph Sharp. This is her first meeting as a substantive Director of Corporate Development for the authority. So welcome, Steph. Same to you, please. Look forward to working with you. Okay, without any further ado, just one point of technical, I'm not going to go to technical points, but I'll say it anyway. Please don't talk over each other because these machines apparently have some limitations, and it is best and clearer for recording purposes if one person is talking at any one time. So please try and avoid talking over each other. Thank you very much. Do we have any apologies, Alistair?
Apologies today from Diane Perry, Chair.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Is there anyone present at the meeting who has any declaration they wish to make in terms of any item or paper on the agenda? Thank you very much. Can I turn your attention to the minutes of the last meeting? It's quite a pack, I'm afraid. I know we have to have one change on page 1. Willie, you were there, weren't you? I don't know how we could possibly forget that you were there. You were there.
I do recall coming down that morning.
You were there. Okay, in usual drill, we'll go through the pages quite quickly, and if anybody has any points they want to raise in respect of anything, just shout out, please. Page 2. 3, 4, it's numbered, just to confuse you, it's numbered 7 on your pack, but it is page 4 of the minutes. Page 5, page 6, page 7, page 8, page 9, page 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Everybody content that these are an accurate reflection of the meeting?
Yep.
Thank you. We can approve them. Strategic risk. Over to Ravila now, I think.
Thank you. I won't take too long on this. You'll see from the quarterly summary that generally there's not been much change in the risk position for many of the risks. We have already done a deep dive on the financial sustainability risk that went to the relevant committee, and in the next quarter we'll be looking at health, safety and well-being, partnership working and cyber and data security. In addition, we'll be doing a specific in-depth review, so not a deep dive, but in-depth review of legitimacy to look at the scoring on that. If anyone has any questions on the risk, happy to take questions.
Anybody?
I've just got one, because I think this is a really good document, and it may already be in a pack somewhere else, but on the risk on recruitment and retention, it's good to see that we are making progress in being more reflective of the communities we serve. It would be good just to see that data, if you've got it, just to see how that is. It might already be covered in one of the subcommittees, but really promising to see. So
sure, we can do that.
Good to see the data.
Hand raised from Tricia.
Yep. Tricia.
Thanks very much. Good morning, everybody. So just 2 points from me. First is just to say I'm very much looking forward to the conversation that we've scheduled on the legitimacy risk, because I think that's really, we can't hold that risk in this place for much longer. And then second, the more general point, which is around the time frame for the target risk scores across the strategic risks. A reflection looking at the latest document is there's actually only one of the strategic risks where we've got an ambition to move towards the target in the next 6 months. And I think that when we're looking at these risks, we should really challenge ourselves on whether we're willing to hold the risks for the amount of time that we're currently planning. That particularly struck me on financial sustainability and cyber and data, but there are other examples as well. So there are risks that we've got very low appetite for, but that we're holding without movement for more than 6 months. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Paula, then Kenna.
I think I'm going to make the same comment I made at the last meeting, which is I feel it's difficult to justify saying that cyber and data security is a risk that we expect to go down over the next 1 to 3 years. Everything we know about that as a risk to all businesses suggests that there is more effort, more resource, more capability being built into the criminal side of using IT to hack into organisations. And no matter how effective we are, I think that external force is going to be running at a pace. So I worry that indicating we think that it's going to go down for the next 1 to 3 years makes us look unduly complacent.
Okay, Kenna, then Alistair.
I just want to note that the audit committee, we asked to see the force risk register that sits below the strategic risk, because obviously this is a good picture for us as the authority to look at, but what's important also is what is it underpinned by, so we will be doing that within the next quarter.
Alistair, then Abdul.
Thank you, Chair. Certainly on the cyber and data security risk, I mean, it does concern me greatly, as I've said at previous committees, but we're working hard within technology and the wider force to put as many mitigations in place as we can and keep up with the sort of criminal ambition. That comes with resource investment, there's no doubt about it. We've got to be really clear on that. And we have set ourselves some milestone ambitions to improve our rating within police digital services, so the national rating and our cyber security. One of them is this month, actually, and I need to check that we've reached it, and we've set ourselves another milestone to move up the ladder of ratings by June 2025 as well. So the cyber team are really on it. We've recruited staff into there just about to our establishment. It is, Paul says, really hard to keep pace with all of it. From a public service point of view, public services as a whole and law enforcement are coming into sharper focus from organised crime and state-sponsored threats. So the sort of the funnel is narrowing towards us, if that makes sense, in terms of our threat. But in the background, of course, we continue to exercise and test, not only internally, but with partners as well. Some of our key rail partners are very aligned to us in this space. So there is a lot of work in the background. I would say, as always, if members are interested, there's always the opportunity from the cyber team and I chair the cyber assurance board for a briefing of some sort in a non-public session or breakfast group.
Abdul, please.
A few questions, but I'll start off with cyber security. So I think if we work with other public bodies or any other bodies in relation to cyber or service. But if I look at the cyber and data security or TFL, so you say that you can't publicly publish or act on the information. I'm assuming you can act on the information internally, or could you not do anything?
Yeah, I mean, we hold information intelligence around the threat and method of threat, so we act on that internally and we adjust our systems accordingly, but it's not something we would put into the public domain.
Okay, and then if I'm able to ask about recruitment and retention.
Yes.
So in relation to recruitment and retention, so it's quite welcome regarding black applicants, but what about other ethnic minorities and, you know, the retention and recruitment of more generally senior officers within BTP come externally rather than having that internal knowledge and experience from, you know, PC right up to COM?
Yeah, please.
We don't generally attract other police officers here because of the transfer of pensions as a prohibitor. People tend to join when they hit 30 years of service, and at the moment, the majority of police officers 30 years of service are not as diverse as perhaps the new generation joining policing.
But what about the work that we're needing to do within BTC to develop and retain the talent that we've got to secure within, you know, ultimately officer ones are coming from within BTP?
We are doing that. We actually share that with the People and Culture Committee, so I don't know, Chair, if you want me to go into detail here because it's been covered by another committee.
Can you summarise it in a couple of sentences?
We have a lot of positive action programmes. We have a black talent programme. We're working with our black employee associations and also with our staff associations on encouraging people to progress through. And we're monitoring at all the promotion boards the number of people applying, the number of people shortlisted, the number of people progressing, and we are gradually seeing a shift, but it will take time.
Sure. And then the last point is, about stop and search. So I see that, you know, if you've got other ethnic minority data, that would be helpful. I think more generally.
Certainly make that very.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anybody else on this item? Yeah.
I think on the recruitment thing, it's probably just worth reminding the authority of currently financial reasons for recruitment freeze, so we're not taking anyone at the moment, and of course at the moment we don't know how long that's going to go on for, so it's probably just worth adding that in, because that's a risk in terms of diversifying our workforce.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Are we content to note? Thank you very much. Alistair, policing plan, please.
Thanks very much. So overall, I'll start with policing plan crime. Year to date, we're around 6% up on the same period last year in terms of overall crime numbers. The report you've got here takes us through to the end of October 24. I'll try and bring you right up to date on some of the figures. One of the concerns we have at the moment is around violence, and whilst the pack reflects that serious violence has dropped from August, I had a 1% month-on-month drop in that last reporting period. What we are seeing within the overall picture is some really rising levels of serious violence within the overall envelope, and that's the concern for us at the moment. We know that we've had, to date, unfortunately, 9 homicides since the 1st of January, which is pretty much unprecedented, I'm afraid, and that number will increase as a result of some serious assaults this weekend. So we're keeping a real close eye on that, focus on that. We obviously have within those figures last week the awful murder of a rail staff member. Ilford, which is causing a bit of concern, quite rightly, through industry and wider. And we're working hard in this space to increase our visibility and presence, which is what has been fed back to me by MDs, Network Rail colleagues and more as we move into the Christmas period. So violence as a whole continues to be above the upper control limits, but our concern at the moment is the serious violence. Charlie's brought forward an extraordinary task meeting to the 13th to manage that over the Christmas and the New Year period. On robbery, you've often heard me talk about this in the past, how this is a real threat to us. Some good news, we continue year on year to see a decrease in those figures, although with the autumn period and moving into Christmas seasonal things, that's taken that up. Within the overall figure, we're still seeing a high number of weapon-enabled robberies, so knife-enabled robberies, and members will be aware that myself and Ron attended the knife-enabled robbery task force meeting with the government just over a month ago, such is the level of concern in that realm. But more offenders being brought to justice and certainly being arrested, and the figures are better than last year. I'll just drag out some of the other highlights. I think staff assaults, I mean, I've sort of touched on the serious end of this, but we are seeing more reports of staff assaults. The crime trend in that area is pointing upwards. Most of them, thankfully, are what we call lower level assaults, threats and common assault, nonetheless a worrying trend there. And the same for police officer assaults year on year. So numbers have been on the rise since the start of the year, and although the detection rate is better than it was last year, as you'd expect, is a concern for us. Other areas of focus are fraud and sexual offences. Again, not seeing much of a slowdown in recorded numbers in that arena, quite frankly, and that remains a concern. We know now that that's a stated ambition of industry and government to halve the figures over the coming periods. Again, we're refining our control strategy for sexual offences abroad. We need to adjust our approach. But nonetheless, it is a huge issue for us. What that brings with it, and our ANZAC and Charlie discussed this particularly for example, our CID officers, is a really heavy workload of investigations, which is becoming increasingly for them to manage. We know that for the inspection to HMRC, that is an area of focus, and our force as a whole is managing its resource allocation investigations. So again, we can really close eye on that. I'll move on, if that's okay, from the crime piece just to go to. Sorry, I've been asked to speak up. Apologies. here at the end of the table, but I will do my best. On page 38 of the pack, we touched on diversity figure and proportionality of stop and search figures at the moment. Overall find rate remains high, one of the highest in the UK, certainly in the top 2 or 3, around 51%, which is really, really pleasing. We know that we can do better in that realm in terms of managing disproportionality. The scrutiny remains really high in that area as well. Self-defined ethnicity, where we're not recording the ethnicity of those affected, is sitting at around 13%, which has crept up and slightly disappointing, given we were doing much better in that realm. In terms of calls for service, medium priority graded incidents increased by 1 percentage point September into October, but again that's gone up 7% since the start of the performance year, and that's certainly been felt in contact centre and control rooms, although the new staff that we have introduced, I'm pleased to see, have begun to take some of the pressure off, and some of the crime reporting statistics and figures are going slowly in the right direction, but as we move into a really busy period, that will remain a concern for us. And social behaviour priority and immediate grade calls went up by 3% within that last quarter. And again, it's an area where we have been making inroads as happening in the social behaviour part of the industry, but I think more reports are coming in, and I expect that figure to be stable for the next quarter. Right, I'll move into vulnerability, safeguarding and disruption, if that's okay.
Yeah. Year
to date, 5% increase in fatality figures, non-suspicious, and currently running at 24 incidents a month in that realm. Our handback time at the moment is still over the 90 minutes, which is around 106 minutes. We are seeing some positive progress, certainly within this quarter, I'm pleased to say, in some of the outer-lying areas on the C and D division, but nonetheless we're still not hitting, not near the 90 minutes at the moment. In terms of minutes, we know that reaction minutes and secondary minutes have been on an upward trend. They did drop slightly in that second quarter, but again it remains challenging. Primary minutes dropped by 16% July to October, but there's been an upward trend all over around police-related disruption incidents as well. I will stop there. Any questions?
Before I throw it open, Alistair, just a couple of questions from me, if I may, or one really. We know that government priorities are very clearly around the reduction of knife-enabled crime in all forms and also violence against women and girls. Are your frontline colleagues content that they are receiving sufficient cooperation and joint working with industry? Is that going okay?
Yes. Interesting. I met yesterday with senior colleagues from Network Rail around what we can do more of together in this space, and certainly, for example, from a technological side of the business, we're looking to join up the work that we're doing with LFR, live facial recognition, which we will begin with the Met, and also now look to begin to incorporate our industry colleagues within that to utilise that. The integrated police and security pilot, we know that the appetite from the industry to become more involved with their security resources, guarding services, land shelters and more is a huge appetite at the moment, and Ian will be taking that on as a new pilot. But certainly yesterday I had a really good discussion around how we bring that quicker down the line and look to see how we can extend it. There's no shortage of appetite in that realm.
Sure, thank you.
Can I just add to that? So at the last meeting, I think, Andy, you touched on a letter that we've written into government in terms of some of the changes in legislation that we would look for and some other opportunities. I mean, there are definitely, we would like to see faster progress in terms of the adoption of some of the legislative changes that we have proposed. I think also, you know, the key issue is that, you know, the CCTV across the network is poor, and that undermines our ability to bring offenders to justice and create a hostile environment for criminality. And, you know, I understand that the department are working with the Home Office to look for a joint bid for the spending review in terms of improvement of the CCTV, which
you know, has got a high cost to it, but when you look at the costs to victims, actually, I think, you know, it is something that we would want to see greater progress on. So there's the prevention of crime on the network, where, you know, we are seeing better joint working, but I think in terms of bringing offenders to justice, that remains a challenge for us, and we would want to see a significant step up, particularly in relation to fraud and knife-enabled crime.
Thank you. Yeah.
Chair, thank you. It fits Chief Constable's point about technology. I was wondering where we are on encouraging further use of technology, particularly when I'm looking at the data we've got here on threat violence and violent crime generally going up. CCTV is one thing, and it's good to hear work's being done on that. Are we also working with all rail partners to encourage use of body-worn video by rail staff as well? We've talked about it at the Scottish Railway Policing Committee, and there's more work to do on that with some. And I wondered more generally where we are on that, because it may help deter and detect.
Yeah, so there is an awful lot of work going on, and there's definitely a positive approach from industry. It isn't mandatory at the moment, that's still to be negotiated with the employees through industrial relations to negotiate that point. I think there is a challenge for us. There isn't a single procurement framework for body-worn cameras amongst the rail industry, so interoperability to bring that into our systems there's room for improvement. And I think as we move forward, some of the opportunities with GBR to standardise some of this technology would definitely help us in our ability to fight crime. But I would say certainly the conversations that we all as a chief officer team individually have and as a collective, you know, people recognise the benefit of the body-worn cameras and on-board CCTV. You know, that's still not present in anywhere near as many locations as we would like it to be.
Well, okay, I'll take Abdul, then Stuart, please.
Thank you. Just very briefly on the disruption point, so I see, you know, you've touched on it in terms of that it's going down the trajectory, because currently, what is it, 106 minutes, which is above target. Do we foresee that to continue? I know you don't have you're not clear about what else you say here, but do you foresee it continuing to improve?
It's an interesting question. I think in terms of internal adjustments that we made with the existing resource we have, I think we've drummed it home as much as we can to our staff who are involved in command and control deployments and resource allocation and the importance of this and responding appropriately. I think I would like to say that under an optimised policing model with the numbers we need, the whole point of the design was to optimise our response in this area and improve it. So on that basis, on my original assumptions, the answer is yes, I'd like to see that with the numbers required for that. But brutally, honestly, I don't know the answer to that. And I know we're going to have a discussion on this later around what does a settlement look like on policing numbers. We've tried to be really forensically clever around the design of the OPM to look at our officers in the hotspots that they patrol, where they deploy from, the number of officers per shifts, the hours that they cover, and more. And that's the building block to a new model, which is about supporting the industry on the disruption and delay piece. So, dependent, I guess, on policing numbers is the answer to that.
Stuart, then Brian.
Thank you, Chair. Given that the tackling violence against women and girls is a ministerial priority, it's a DFT priority, it's College of Policing priority, it's a COG priority, and it's a Chief Constable priority. We've been coming to these authority meetings a number of years, and the dial is not shifting. I mean, we are not solving 8 in 9 cases of violence against women and girls. You know, 89% of cases are not solved, and I just don't think it's good enough, because we get this every time. It's becalmed, those figures are becalmed, and that's when we've got a policy push to do something about it and tackle it. Now, my question is, what is the organisational, legal, procedural, administrative impediment that prevents us making real progress on this? Because, you know, I've been asking about this for 3 years, and I just think, you know, warm words, butter no parsnips, and it's all very well talking about legislative changes, but we do need action now because this is a priority and the figures are abysmal.
Certainly. Sure, it's a really good point. We're as disappointed as anyone, and Lucy will say, quite frankly, our sexual offences detection rate and our detection rate for fraud, whilst we're in the sort of upper quartile of policing, it's a sort of a bad exam result overall, quite frankly, in that realm. There are some impediments to progress here, there's no doubt about it. Volume is one of them, and we know that through our campaigns over the last 3 years, our channels of reporting, we have more channels of reporting for crime involved than any other force, that we've seen that increase, and therefore the volume is a challenge for us, there's no doubt about it. To give you an idea of some of the changes we'd like to see them pushing hard for, I mean, there are recent examples of assaults on women, sexual assaults on women, where at the point of arrest, and from an evidential point of view, you know, we've had occasions where our officers have witnessed the offence, where we've stopped the victim at the time, we've got a statement from them, they're willing to proceed to court. Nick will know this, that under current guidelines around charging, we still have to bail that individual for a charging decision, rather than deal with them at that point, put them before a court, get an ancillary order to prevent them coming onto the rail network. So it's only one area of challenge for us at the moment. A lot of the time our reports of sexual offences involved obviously come later, so they're later through single online home reporting. That presents a challenge for us around rewinding the tape, is the way of describing it, going back to get the CCTV. Lucy's already touched on the quality of CCTV at some locations. That remains a challenge for us as well. The intelligence unit within BTP have got a really good operation running around linked series, so that they've identified a whole load of linked series and repeat offenders that we are working on. I should say some of the positives are that we've got more ancillary orders, so prevention orders, sexual harm prevention orders, criminal behaviour orders, community behaviour orders and banning orders than ever before, and yet the volume still increases. So I think there is a challenge around resources here, if I'm really honest with you, and I think there's a challenge around charging decisions.
Can I just come back? I mean, I do think there should be a big push with ministers, the Chief Constable and others, the COG and the Chair, meets ministers. I do think if there's an issue around bail conditions and bailing people, this is a very serious crime. You're pushing an open door with ministers, formerly with Louise Haig, definitely with Heidi Alexander, I think. Change the regulations. I mean, you know, it's as simple as that. Well, it's not that simple, it takes time, but I do think there has to be a process. Change the regulations if we're serious about dealing with that crime on the railways.
One element, Stuart, if I can say, just before Charlie comes in, certainly the Chief Constable and myself are looking to meet with our lead CPS rep on this issue to see if we can run a different pilot within BTP. And for those that have been present at some of the workshops we've run around sexual offences, if you remember, we did that back in February. We did a disruption and delay workshop in September this year. We as a force would certainly be supportive of seeing, Stuart, from a ministerial point of view, the implementation of rail courts. And, you know, we managed to do 24/7 courts during disorder. We dealt with offenders quickly through that process. Yes, there's a cost to it, but actually what we're seeing is, I think, a real serious problem for our travelling public in the walk space here. And we'd like to see some dedicated courts for rail. And that, you know, at one end you see the sort of trespass that's treated fairly leniently. At the other end, we'd like to see a dedicated court that deals with this really, really seriously. And I think at the top end, as a sort of, you know, what's the dream, that will be something that we'd like to see.
Well, I'm seeing the Rail Minister before Christmas in my other capacity on HS2, and if you would be kind enough to just give me a one-side briefing, I will put that directly to him, because he's a very smart guy, knows everything about railways. He's forgotten more than I know about railways, and I think he would be receptive to that, as would other colleagues.
Stuart, can I suggest as well, if you dig out, I think it's on board intelligence, isn't it? If you can dig out the letter that we wrote, which has got all of our requests on it.
Safe work, then I'll look at that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
Yeah, I was just going to pick up on your point around staff assaults, and obviously you touched upon it, the horrific incident on the Elizabeth line, and I think there's implications bigger than that. I think, you know, it's worth putting on record, you know, really quick arrest, good comms from BTP, which was hugely reassuring to the industry around that person being, you know, quickly detained. I suppose the thing about that is we think as an industry that's probably the first rail sort of staff murdered on duty in about 30 years. So, incredibly rare. But I suppose if you think about the lower end, we've previously talked about staff assaults, and I think the view's been sometimes it's difficult to get, victims to actually support prosecutions and things like that. How is that in the current, how are you guys doing with that? Is that still quite a problem? Is there anything we can do in the witness sort of care capacity to try and boost people who are doing that so that, it really is a zero tolerance thing? How's that sort of challenge coming along?
I'll bring Charlie in a minute, but I think comparatively, if you look at fraud and sexual offending, force now have more victims willing to substantiate a crime and go to court than we did 3 years ago, which is a really, really good move for us. I think there is still a significant chunk of rail staff victims, and it was over the 20% mark that would fail to substantiate or be willing to go to court. And that is a challenge. Sorry, I don't know if you want to add.
So, thanks, Alistair. So, just in terms of witness care, we've probably got one of the most well-developed witness care capabilities in the country. So, but some of the challenges they're up against, court listings, pushing back to 26, 27, so they're able to keep victims on board for a long time. Specifically around rail staff, I think the Chief's point earlier around body-worn video, I think it's a very strong evidence in terms of courts. It enables victims to sort of not have to give evidence in person at court. So I think there are lots of reasons why we would encourage operators and staff to use it. Nevertheless, there is still a reluctance amongst staff to actually go to prosecution. They don't stand in the box, they don't want to be cross-examined. They're concerned they're going to meet that offender again. It comes back to sentencing, Stuart's point. So I think there are lots of sort of moving factors in it. There are some things we can do to help ourselves. Body-worn being a start. I think certainly support from unions, support from operators, releasing staff in order to write their statements, to give evidence, all those things. There's some practical things we can do. Just going back to Stuart's point briefly around sexual offences, it might be worth just reminding members that probably 4 or 5 years ago, when we first embarked on the journey of increasing the level of reporting, we knew that we would enter that space at sort of an intelligence level, so not at an evidential level. So in order to encourage victims to come forward, to encourage reporting, to increase confidence of victims, so if you tell us what's happened, firstly we can get some support around you, we can put you in touch and signpost you to relevant agencies. More importantly, we can then start to focus our resources on those areas where we know those crimes are happening. And that is why we've seen ourselves move from sort of third quartile performance to top quartile performance. I absolutely accept it's nowhere near good enough, but essentially there's probably only about 40% of those crimes that are ever going to be evidentially provable in terms of threshold standard or full code test with the CPS and the courts. So we are looking at a much smaller number of jobs that are actually available for detection in the first place. But crucially, what it enables us to do is to target offenders and target locations to prevent it happening in the first place.
Okay, Sean then. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Just briefly, just supporting back to what the Chief Constable earlier said about the importance of member support into CCTV. We know in terms of convictions, especially against war, proof is beyond reasonable doubt. Victims absolutely come on board if they know they're supported by good imagery. The importance and relevance of that. The most recent female Vorg murder on the railway was covered or not covered by a broken camera on the network. And even close to your own work, and Brian, you will know that the newest railway on the UK network, the Elizabeth line, actually covered by 3 separate CCTV systems without interoperability within BTPA direct across all systems. So that wider systems thinking into the importance of CCTV is absolutely crucial. The one point we mustn't lose is investment with industry into body-worn cameras to protect staff in lieu of investment of CCTV to protect the passenger.
Yeah.
One of the things I've been really impressed with at BTP since I started is something called Operation Streamline, and that's as a result of investment made over the previous years, and it just shows how investment can help us solve more crime. And that is basically an intelligence unit that will take an image of an offender and look to identify them. And in the best month this year so far, they did 200 identifications in 1 month, using a whole range of technology and intelligence that I won't go into in the open meeting. I'll have to talk about over a coffee or in a closed session later. So I just wanted to say my own force didn't have that. So that's really impressive and shows what we can achieve with investment. And if I can just link the technology and the disruption together, give you two examples from this month, is we had a fatality, tragic fatality, where we were able to dial in remotely into a forward-facing CCTV on the cab, access that immediately, and that allowed us to return the network in 71 minutes. We had a very similar incident where we couldn't access that forward-facing CCTV. It took 3 days to come to us, could only be downloaded at the depot, and the platform CCTV, again, which showed what happened, could only be downloaded in office hours. And therefore, it took considerably longer. You know, we weren't able to hand the network back for several hours because we weren't able to access that technology. So, you know, when I'm going around and doing my introductions with ND talks, it's one of the things I'm talking about is our ability to be able to access things immediately, because technology done well means we can give that network back in 71 minutes. Technology which we can't access until office hours does absolutely nothing for disruption at all. And we do have a project, subject to funding next year in 2025, where we do hope to be able to work on black box technology to be able to access some of this CCTV out of hours very quickly, because we need to see that CCTV within an hour so we can return the network back, but that will take us.
Richard, did you want to answer?
Yes, so I just wanted to, Stuart, just come back to your point around influencing ministers. So I have met Jess Phillips, who, as you will know, has a strong drive in terms of VORG and is certainly very interested in a lot of the suggestions that we have made for improvement in terms of legislation. I also went to the number 10 round table, which was specifically around the launch of spiking legislation, but within that, obviously, we talked around some of the legislative challenges. I mean, one of the things that I feel very strongly about is that Rohypnol is still only a Class C drug, and, you know, it's a prescription drug. If you've got it and you haven't got a prescription, you know, there is only probably one explanation as to why you're carrying Rohypnol. So I think we need to see more consistency in terms of some of our legislation. Demand is a big challenge for us, and, you know, I always said when I started as Chief Constable that I expected to see a rise in violence against women and girls as victims become more confident to report into policing. You know, we have to look ourselves in the mirror. For a long time, particularly women haven't necessarily felt confident to come forward and report to policing. So, you know, we certainly as a Chief Officer team, and I know BTP as a whole is, you know, very pleased to see the growing confidence of victims. But we have consumed that additional work through efficiencies elsewhere within the force, and I think there will come a point where, you know, we will need to come back to the authority to say that this continues to grow as an area of business. If we want to be, you know, really truly the best in class of dealing with this, then, you know, there is investment that we will need in order to make sure that we can get the right outcomes for victims and, you know, make sure that it's a hostile environment for criminals. And that includes some of the technological advancements, but also, you know, our ability to speed up the justice system. And Stuart, you know, that is a big challenge for us, as Alistair touched on. You know, we've got rape cases that are being listed for 2026. And, you know, for a victim to have to retell their story many years after the actual attack, I find woefully unacceptable. And we need to find better solutions as a whole system to that. And I know that there is strong cross-party ministerial support and from other parties as well. So the stuff that Alistair touched on from the CPS perspective is really quite, you know, critical for us to make some progress on that. I mean, if money was no objective, I would be looking to try and fund dedicated lawyers to make charging decisions in our sexual offences cases. Hopefully that gives you flavour. If you want anything else, then do let us know, because it's such an important topic.
So during, as you know, because you were very involved in 2011, you had night courts to deal with the disorder in the London and other places. Do you think that would, I mean, obviously there are huge budgetary constraints, but would Wales courts and night courts make a demonstrable difference in unblocking the logjam?
Yes.
Yes.
I think, if I can, the chair, so on that,
I think your colleagues have
with some legislative reform, and if you take trespass as an example, we know is the biggest driver in police-related disruption incidents. We know the fine is still woefully low at £1,000, which was actually put into law, I think, in 1962. That's still a penalty. It's rarely given as a maximum fine. and there's something about victim impact statement from around that, where we're putting people before the courts, where I don't think the seriousness of what sits behind this incident is ever really seen, and that's due to the pressures of the courts. They're hearing trespass alongside TV licensing.
Yep.
You know, so that is the way the world, that's the demand that the criminal justice system faces. But I do think from a rail court point of view, dedicated courts would be able to unpick the impact and maybe look at legislative change. And I think, I mentioned, Stuart, the ancillary orders that we apply for. So every case now that goes through charging will be looked at for a prevention order. So can they be kept off the rail through criminal orders or a civil order? And there's a cost to that as well, certainly CPS time, our time, legal advice time as well. But I think if that process as well was refined, our ability to keep people off the rail network would be much better. And I am going to link it to technology, because if you think about that, you know, if we're moving into the world of live facial recognition, which we are, we're looking to sort of upload our top 100 violent offenders who pose a risk to rail staff and public into those databases. As soon as you get an ancillary order, if our systems are working, they're going to get loaded onto there as well. You know, so there is some sort of almost a straightforward line that we can take here that will improve. And if we're willing to push that hard, I'll be really supportive of that.
Charlie.
Just very, very quickly, just so we already do that for post-conviction offenders. I think what Alistair's referred to as pre-conviction offenders, so where we've got intelligence that suggests they pose a danger. That's the 100 we're trying to capture.
Okay, I'm conscious of time. If anybody has any urgent questions,
Can I just ask a question, if I may? I think I've asked this here before. We have a lot of hand-wringing about CCTV and the extent it's there and so on. Have we asked the industry at operator level what their position is, so we know how big the problem is in terms of what we need to invest in? With most new rolling stock, for example, should be equipped pretty much as standard now. If we don't know the answer to that, it'd be quite easy to ask. I'm quite happy to talk to Hugh and try and sort that out, because at the moment we keep on, you know, we don't actually know how big the problem is, do we? How much is covered?
About £1 billion has costed about 5 years ago to upgrade the system.
But do we know, because there's new rolling stock coming all the time, you know, I mean, do we know what the position is? Because if not, I think we ought to find out. It's easy, we've just got to ask the talks in the right way.
There is a running tally of forward-facing. What is less clear is the fixed infrastructure. So some of those operators are still quite literally operating on analogue systems.
But I suppose the other question is, who owns that strategic thing that says if you are introducing a new train onto the infrastructure, it must have remote capability to access forward-facing? Because South Eastern are about to place a huge order, aren't they, for new rolling stock? People are placing, is it actually there? And this is how, you know, there's loads of stuff that, you know, there's the court side of things, but the stuff within the industry, and there's got to be an opportunity for GBR. And again, Stuart, if you're meeting, you know, Lord Hendy and stuff, that's the sort of stuff. It shouldn't be something that we have to fix afterwards. And I worry that some of the stuff isn't being built in. It might be forward-facing, but it might not be remote.
So that was a ministerial requirement when Grant Shapps was at the chair. So and then that was written into the 10-point plan. So that's essentially a joint plan between industry and transport.
And we think that's still there.
It is still there.
Okay.
How far it's progressed is a separate question.
Okay, anybody else? Alistair.
Last point, I know we're taking a bit of time in this discussion, but on that point, Brian, around the sort of future industry infrastructure build, whether it's on train or platform or station, one of the roles of the strategic hub, which obviously we introduced this year, is to pick all of that up with the authority around investment over the next 10, 20 years and look to see how we build our operating model into it. And one of the things that we get very late sight of at the moment is the infrastructure developments. So we don't get the opportunity, as Andy said, at source to be able to build into it. That's one of the ambitions we've got.
But you guys probably aren't on HS2 board, for example, are you yet? Or maybe someone should be.
Okay, anybody, any final points before we move on? If you've got any questions that come up, I'm sure Alistair will be happy to take them, or if you want any further information on any of these matters. Otherwise, we can tend to note the policing report.
Yeah.
Thank you. Financial performance. We've got Rabila and Steph here. What are you dealing with first?
I think Steph was happy to take this
Over to you then, Steph.
Yeah, that's okay. So I'm conscious of time, so I was just going to give members a very brief update of where we are at the moment. Q1, I reported a BAU under recovery of 8.3 million, which was brought down to 3.5 million pressure. To shore this up, we agreed at the time a combination of proactive control measures alongside realism assessments Some of the measures have worked harder for us than we predicted, others haven't been as successful. But by P6, Q2, the forecast net under recovery had reduced to 2.6 million, which is a really encouraging shift from the 8.3 at the previous authority. Then after including the additional pressure created by the PRRB settlement, of 0.89 million, a couple of claims relating to a historic corruption case in the 60s and 70s, and an updated risk and opportunity log with a net opportunity, it had brought the forecast Q2 overspend to 1.96 million, which is within just 0.5% of our overall budget. So on P7, that came down further to a £1.8 million overspend forecast. And having had early sight of the period 8 position, that's due to go to Fourth Executive Board this week. The trajectory looks good to keep bringing this down as we approach year end. There are some big items we've still got in the risk and opportunities log, which puts the pressure on us forecasting for the remaining quarter of the year, but our direction is very much to continue to scale back spending where we can. If possible, what I'd like to do is create some space to consult on some restructuring work in this financial year. And I say that because when we enter into consultation, we have to account for any redundancy impacts in the financial year when you enter consultation. And if we can do that early, it will help us reduce costs in 25-26. Moment we don't have the headroom for that in the budget, but we're closely monitoring the R&O, and we've got business cases ready to go. So I reported to FLB that I don't think it's necessary to take any further proactive measures, and that remains my position. We went hard and early this year, and that's definitely paying off. And it's thanks to the support of budget holders and many staff and officers across the force who've really been playing their part. So we're due to report the Q3, which we'll know in January. That goes to the Finance, Visibility and Performance Committee in February, and that will be the final forecast of this year, which, short of any surprises, I do expect to be very close to the bottom line, and we'll take a decision at that point about bringing forward any of that consultation work that I've referenced. And I was just going to leave it there.
Okay, thanks, Steph.
I don't have anything to add other than that. Thank you.
Any questions or points from any colleagues around the table? Paula.
Just to say congratulations to Steph. I think that's a real turnaround from the discussions we've had in the past from authority, and the fact that you're proactively looking at how to spend the money to manage costs going forward, I think is a great thing for us to do.
Well done, Steph and team. Are we content to note that report?
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Can I just say well done to Richard, who is sitting over there. So,
that's what I said as team. I saw you there, Richard. Don't worry. Okay, item 7 is withdrawn. BTP budget and NTFP. I've got that. Is that you, Regina?
Yeah, were you going to start, or were you going to ask the Chief Constable to start?
I don't mind. Would you like to kick off?
I'll let the authority go first.
So I was, so in relation to the BTP budget and NTFP, you have papers from the force and you have paper from the authority, and really don't propose that we go through all of those papers in detail. They have been to the Strategy and Planning Committee. What I would say, just from a point of view from the recommendation from the Executive, just a few words to explain where we've got to. So I feel it's common that everybody in this room has in common that they want BTP to succeed in providing an efficient and effective policing for the railway, and that is the sort of fundamental purpose of all of us. We can see that the pressures are significant. So in the BTP paper and elsewhere, and just in the news, you can see the pressures facing the force are significant. You can also see the really difficult backdrop of the financial position which the government is in and the country is in. So I find it is a very difficult balance for members to strike. In one sense, I don't envy you your role. It's a very difficult balance for you to strike. You did hear about the rail finances specifically from the department about 2 days ago. Those of you who were available on my breakfast briefing. And I think, from my point of view, the easiest way to think about it is whatever you spend on the British Transport Police is essentially money taken away from running a railway. So it's one sort of very large pot to run a railway, but you take approximately 400 million right out of it. That's the kind of easiest way to consider it. The force have set out their stall in respect to the pressures they face in the paper that's before you, and I think this is where it becomes difficult, because in truth, that all adds up to too much. This is the executive position. And I feel, we feel, it looks like a bit of the public sector, being BTP in this instance, asking for considerably more than other parts of the public sector will be expecting to get at this point in time next year. And that includes parts of the public sector spending which you would consider, health, education, defence, which you would consider to be protected, do you feel? So very difficult to explain why British Transport Police would be receiving a more significant increase than those other parts of the public sector, all of whom are under extreme pressures. And I think that is, in a nutshell, the very difficult decision you have in front of you. I would go further and say that what we've seen so far, the paper is from the force is stronger in setting out all the pressures on the force and the difficulties that creates, and maybe less strong on explaining some of the efficiencies and the opportunities that will be available. They are mentioned, but the weight is on the pressures for spending, and our feeling is there's more to go at in relation to the efficiencies overall. Last year we charged out, or we increased our charges by 10.9%. To the industry. I think you feel that did push the envelope of acceptability at that time. Was in a more inflationary world, but nonetheless, I think inflation was down to about 6% by the time we were doing that. It was a bit of catch up, but 10.9% last year. In terms of the executive team, we started, in this discussion back in the summer, maybe the early summer. We were considering around about a 2% increase would be a reasonable ballpark for the year ahead. Since that time, we had the pay award for policing, which was a little bit higher than possibly some of us had been anticipating, and you saw that kind of inflation picture beginning to bubble up a bit. So as an executive team, that took us back to 3%, and that's what you members asked the force to model, and they have modelled in part in the paper before you, so that's where we got to by August. Since that time, we've had the budget, and we've seen the pressures that BTP is under, and I think a combination of those two things. The budget, there's a little bit more near-term flexibility in spending, overall, possibly than you might have been expecting in a budget, and clearly the pressures are significant on the force. So that is why, as an executive, that's pushed us up to recommend to you essentially an increase in line with the regulated rail fares for next year of 4.6%. So that's how much the industry is expecting to increase its fare base by, and that seems to us in the right ballpark for what BTP can reasonably be expecting to see, given the difficult balance you have to strike. A little bit of context. When I arrived at BTPA 5.5 years ago, Ron, we were sort of in a habit of pushing up the budget by RPI, and there had been a commitment to the industry that they would reduce that to CPI. And there was the discussion between a force and authority was, well, can we go to CPI, can't we? That was the sort of tone of the discussion around about 2019, 2020. Clearly COVID then arrived and everything became a bit different. So RPI would be 3.6% in this particular year. It's what's based on July. So you're looking at RPI plus 1, which is how far the regulated fares are going up. I should say, the paper does say it, but I should spell it out, that in the executive we are suggesting that since it looks like the way of dealing with the employer's NI contribution will be we ought to be charging it out, we would suggest to you that you do that in addition to whatever settlement you arrive at. So if you did arrive at 4.6%, which is our recommendation, you would in fact be charging out an additional roughly 1.3%, which is the employer's NI, based on the basis of the decision of the budget. So again, that would look to a customer like a 5.9% increase, something you ought to bear in mind. So having sort of more than doubled our initial thinking from the 2% that we started, and sort of looking at the prospect of a 5.9% increase to our customers, our view in the executive is we just don't think members have the flexibility to go beyond that, notwithstanding the pressures that you've seen in the paper before you. You want to support BTP and you want to assure the department and the industry that you keep costs down with them. This seems to be the right balance to strike. You're looking at inflation predicted for about 2.6% across the year. We've asked the force to model a pay rise of about 2.5%. Again, in that context, 4.6% does look like as far as you could possibly go. And that actually is my summary of how the executive got to our position.
Thank you. Rebecca, do you want to add anything?
No, that's fine, thank you.
Can I just correct something? The paper you've got at 8.1 was not seen by Strategy and Planning Committee. I mean, we got a very quick and dirty page and a half Rabila's had the opportunity to do more work. So the quite extensive paper you see here wasn't seen by the committee, just to be fair to members.
Lucy?
Right, thank you. So first of all, I want to say a huge thank you to my team for such a comprehensive proposal. I mean, Richard's in the room, Steph's online. There are lots of people in BTP that have done an awful amount of analysis in order to help us shape the recommendation that we've put forward. I will work on the basis that members have read the paper, but I'm also conscious that some of you haven't had the input at strategy and planning committee that was given by Steph and Richard, so they are available to answer any questions. I'd like to thank Rabila for her paper and Hugh for your input, but I'm sure it will come as no surprise to everyone that I don't agree with the recommendation of 4.6%. And I would have valued the opportunity to discuss that paper before submission, as I think it would have really benefited from the detail on the operational consequences as a result of that settlement. And then I think that could have helped you as members just frame some of your thinking in a little bit more detail. The consequence for the government's priorities for rail and policing doesn't seem to have been evaluated in the paper. It states that the real drivers for the MTFP are inflation and PRRB, and I suppose as a Chief Officer team we're really concerned at the exclusion of effective performance and service delivery, which I also believe is a critical point of the MTFP, particularly having heard some of the reflections that Alistair and the team have given you over performance. But I suppose my biggest concern is that the industry voice is not represented. The proposals do not reflect what senior industry stakeholders are telling me. So in proposing our settlement, myself and the Chief Officer team have been very conscious to balance financial efficiency against the strategic priorities for rail and policing and therefore operational effectiveness. It has absolutely never been more important to ensure that every pound invested in us goes as far as possible to keep passengers safe on a reliable railway network. I have extensively engaged with senior stakeholders from Network Rail, train operators, DOHL, which was formerly the operator of Last Resort, Shadow GBR and RDG. They have all received unequivocal direction from the Secretary of State and ORR that substantial improvement is required to ensure a reliable railway. There is a universal recognition, in my opinion, and that of the Chief Officer Group, that BTP is a critical enabler to that. And the economic value we provide to the rail industry is understood and valued by those who fund our services. In short, they need more of what we do, not less of it. Ministers are also extremely clear to me that we must support their ambition to reduce railway disruption and reduce crime on the railway, particularly, as we've already discussed this morning, violence against women and girls. Indeed, at the recent roundtable, which I mentioned with the Prime Minister, he reiterated the commitment to halve violence against women and girls during the next decade, and also, as Ron and Alistair are aware, that commitment extends to halving knife-enabled crime. So all of this, in my view, is in the context of a tide of increasing demand, increased passenger numbers, increasing calls for service, increased vulnerability across the network. There is more crime and it is simply more complex. There are also other areas, for example, cybercrime, technology, professional standards and offender management, which need to be scaled up in terms of our approach through effective investment. As your Chief Constable, I must deliver an efficient and effective policing service. Myself and my Chief Officer team know we must do this in a way which provides the best value for money and which ensures an effective police force, which is the foundation for which we have proposed our budget proposal. I'm now going to hand over to Steph, and she's going to outline the approach that we have taken.
So I think everyone can see the slide on the screen. I'm just going to talk you through the building blocks in that. So first, the dark green building block at the bottom left-hand side is price. So that's where I've had to account for what we have today at next year's prices. And this block is mainly the cost of pay increases and contractual spine points alongside non-pay inflation, mandated charges, and externally led unavoidable increases, especially across multi-year contracts. And what we found is that suppliers are seeking to recover costs from the previous peak in inflation when we come to renew. But there's no new people in that block and no new services. The next, the slightly lighter green one, is the portfolio base. So, and this is a similar discussion that we had last year, some members will recall. Our ambition to transform continues to be outstripped by our portfolio budget, but specifically for this MTFP, asset replacement and non-discretionary works have increased significantly. So taken together with in-flight projects alone, they will cost a further 4.4 million to the PSA. And you'll see from the paper, this is predominantly replacing old cars, broken air conditioning units, defibrillators, laptops, and a range of different forced relocations. It's essential spend that we must factor in before we consider any changes to how we operate. And I was clear that this base portfolio must only include what we have to do. Then in the yellow block, we look at the moving target of crime demand. Now, we've spoken quite a bit about the impacts of rising demand and capacity already today. Our crime demand forecast is based on actual BTP data, and it's done using a well-known statistical model. It has a high level of accuracy, and actually when we used it for the 23-24, it was only 1.7% out. The Crime Survey of England and Wales doesn't include crime against business, the railway industry and tourists, and it's poor at representing knife crime and sex offences. So as a method of prediction, it lacks validity where two populations are distinctly different. So instead, using the whole winter seasonal forecasting model in our data, we predicted that BTP crime will increase by 10% by the end of March 25 and a further 17% by March 26. So we need to redistribute our resources through the optimised policing model more efficiently, but we also need to increase the number of police officers on the network to maintain performance against crime demand without letting disruption suffer. And I say that because when crime increases at a higher rate than our resource capacity, we know it tends to be concentrated at the bigger hubs. And to respond to the volume of calls for service, we have to accept that either we increase our resource capacity or accept that we can't be everywhere. So the more people we have on the network, the more capacity we have, the more stations we can keep open. And this is something we feel very strongly about as a Chief Officer Group, as a well-distributed presence better supports our ability to get there first, respond to disruptive incidents, provide local support and reassurance to rail staff, and keep the railway running. So in the orange block, we've taken a bottom-up morale assessment from our force management statement. And that proposed 7.9 million in investment to bridge just the most critical gaps in our services across a range of different departments and functions. That number wasn't palatable to us at COG, and by really testing our risk appetite, we reduced this to the absolute minimum of 2.4 million to the PSA. And that includes things like estates, cyber, disruption and intelligence. Below that would be an intolerable risk. So the force on the move block, only at this stage will we maintain performance. So you can see my method of prioritisation. Then we can look towards making us better for the future as a force on the move. So the red block represents an enhanced portfolio beyond that portfolio base, driving effectiveness and efficiency. From drones beyond the visual line of sight, partner intelligence sharing, and a provision for reducing headcount where there's inefficiency across the force. So this block is the discretionary change, but the change we really want to do. And finally, we pushed ourselves really hard this year in the spirit of the 2% government efficiencies target to identify £5.5 million of cashable efficiencies to the PSA, which offsets almost all of the growth in the proposal. I can't go into the specifics of what's in that block in a public meeting, but there are some really tough decisions there that we've taken to rebalance across BTP in light of the financial pressures public services are under. So there is as much risk in that choice efficiencies block that we think is tolerable. I think I'll hand back to Lucy.
Okay, so following that approach, our proposal is for a 9.8% uplift for 25 to 26. And I suppose I know as a Chief Officer Group, we want to make the point that that is just 3.1% beyond pay and price. This is against an incredibly challenging demand picture, rising expectations from industry and the passengers on our service, and I do not feel that I can responsibly reduce costs any further, and that is our position as your Chief Officer team. If our proposal is supported, it would secure our place front and centre in supporting government and rail objectives, in particular the National 5-point Rail Performance Plan, which you will all be familiar with. It would maintain our proactivity levels and performance against forecasted demand, and importantly, it allows us to improve our response to disruption. It will enable the delivery of the 2% efficiency target that Steph's just mentioned, and it would allow us to deliver a small amount of innovation for the future. But I suppose it's also incumbent on me to outline the consequences of a lower settlement. So in terms of the proposed 4.6%, to achieve this settlement, as recommended by the Treasurer and by the Chief Executive, we would need to reduce costs by 8.5 million next year. In reality, the only way to do this is through people by freezing recruitment. This is because of the timescales that are in play. It is not feasible to conduct an organisational redesign. We would be constrained by the required investment in project support, design approvals, legal consultation, notice periods, and most significantly, the cost of redundancy. Netting off against the part-year savings would at best see us break even. Consequently, to get money out at the rate that that settlement would require would dictate a blunt and inefficient approach. National policing history has shown us that when this approach is taken, it takes sometimes over a decade to recover, and some of that impact, I would say, was reflected in Baroness Casey's findings when she reviewed the Metropolitan Police Service. By the end of next year, we will need to have lost 286 people, reducing our current workforce by 5.8%. I think of interest to members will be our proactivity level, the available time that officers have for visible patrolling. That will drop from 24% today to 11%. This could force the closure, in our professional assessment, of around 17 stations across C and D divisions, as it will no longer be operationally viable for us to maintain a presence there against concentrations of rising crime at hubs. From an early assessment, this could include Lancaster, Carlisle, Sunderland, Middlesbrough, Derby, Lincoln, Exeter, Truro, Plymouth, Inverness, Aberdeen, Dundee, Perth and Dumbarton, and others would be in scope. It would result in a very large geographical response gaps across the west and east coast main lines and other main arteries, which would impact, in our professional judgment, on disruption response times. And this places a greater reliance on response from Home Office forces. It is our view that we simply can't afford to be spread so thin and maintain the number of stations that we have today. And it is forecasted that we would incur 250,000 extra delay minutes as a result. And our economist has identified that the additional cost to industry from the increase in delay minutes alone would be many millions. This, in my view, would far exceed the difference between our proposal and the 4.6%. The Chief Officer commitments to supporting the government and rail industry strategies to reduce disruption may no longer be viable in their current form, and I do feel that we would need to be absolutely transparent with passengers and industry about that. The drone BV loss project would cease, and with it our ability to get ahead of trespass. I think last year, just for members' awareness, there were over 25,000 trespass incidents which caused delay, and that cost the railway industry 106 million and dissatisfaction for millions of passengers. By the end of next year, crime is already expected to rise by 17%, and a reduction in proactivity and visibility on this scale would inevitably mean a steeper increase. Our solved rate is already not where we want it to be, as we've discussed earlier. Our analysis shows that it would inevitably fall further. Fewer calls, texts and emails could be answered and responded to. As a public servant, the Chief Officer Group find it difficult to be really optimistic when describing this scenario, as we are encouraged to be. We believe it is really also very unlikely that passengers, government or the rail industry would be optimistic. So in conclusion, we absolutely, and I really do need to provide this assurance, we absolutely acknowledge the financial pressures are widespread across the public sector and importantly for the taxpayer. But the Chief Officer Group are supportive of driving efficiencies and mitigating long-term costs. However, I also recognise the critical economic value that BTP brings to the rail industry, and I know this is also recognised by the industry themselves. A budget that doesn't address our financial needs amid rising crime demands and increased disruption, in my view and that of the Chief Officer Group, will severely compromise key performance outcomes. It would be detrimental to the railway's performance restoration framework, which requires a collective commitment to reduce trespass and fatalities. And it's with a heavy heart I say to you, since I have been your Chief Constable, 1,000 people have died on the railway. I believe we must face the reality of the cost of policing the railway and what we are all collectively expected to deliver next year. In reality, the force can only produce sustainable efficiencies on the scale of a 4.6% settlement requires as part of a multi-year change programme. None of us want to be in this position again next year. We are here largely as a consequence of single-year settlement approaches which do not make adequate provision for invest to save, nor for statutory consultation processes, redundancy or the organisational design work required to achieve sustainable efficiencies. With GBR on the horizon and a government that continuously values BTP, we should aim to move to a multi-year framework and an adequate capital provision which allows a long-term efficiency programme. But for 2025 to 2026, the Chief Officer Group and I recommend a 9.8% settlement as the right one for BTP, the right one for our government, the railway industry, and most importantly, the right one for passengers. Thank you, Ron.
Thank you very much, Lucy. Do any of my colleagues have any questions or points they would wish to make? Abdul, then Craig, please.
So thank you. I found the paper interesting in the discussion from you and Lucy. It's quite important. I'll just say a few things. Today, the Chancellor has promised to take an iron fist against waste. And she will be asking the Chancellor departments to identify efficiency savings worth 5% from their current budgets. So we've got that backdrop of where we're going trajectory-wise. We've also got, the need for efficiency savings within the force. We've listened to what the Chancellor said. We've also got to focus on what the priorities are within the force of what our core function is. And taking those things into line, a 9.6% or 9.8% increase, would that be palatable within, our customer base when they're already facing the squeeze as well? In addition, expected, us putting forward proposals to even charge out national insurance contributions when the industry is expected to absorb those costs as well, just doesn't sit right with me. I mean, in the percentage figure we will have the discussion about. So I think I'll just leave that at that.
Thank you. Great.
I was just going to say, so the bit about getting to a multi-year settlement and giving the headroom, I think the reality, having gone through this a number of times, whatever the size of BTP should be or is or whatever, we don't collectively have the appetite to spend the level of money to support an organisation at the current size it is. I'll put aside the issue about different views of what the industry is actually saying, and I think we know we've got to get to the bottom of that, because it's clear the authority members who work in the industry have been told something quite different to that which you're hearing, and much more stark about where their appetite for any of this is. And I think we've got to bottom that. We can't deal with this sort of, I call it rumours and innuendo about what the numbers should be. We've got to get to the bottom of it. But I absolutely support the work about we've got to do a multi-year approach that comes with an organisational model that's somewhere more affordable. Otherwise,
the force, the travelling public. We put everybody in a terrible position each year as we have to wrestle through this, getting to a number.
Thank you. Alistair?
I was just going to make a point. I mean, Adam's mention of the 5% sort of government pressure. I mean, that's part, as I understand, it might be wrong, of the sort of spending review, spending review of next year, for example. And I think, you know, what we haven't said here is, as we look to design the optimised policing model, for example, and with GBR now in full flight, for want of a better expression, we've got to think about, it really builds on Craig's point, I think, but I'm slightly taking it in the opposite direction. We've got to think about how we're going to set up British Transport Police for the future, okay? We've got to think about how we're going to align ourselves to be productive and efficient in the new model. And whilst we talk here around sort of fine margins of cost, absolutely get the pressures here, I'm sort of thinking strategically around the future of British Transport Police and having the resilience within the force to be able to deliver on the mission. And we're talking about here a one-year settlement that could potentially be damaging and take us, you know, in financial terms back a few years. And when GBR does arrive, and what it looks like as a whole and our role in it is to be seen. But I do feel we've got to give ourselves, and I mean the authority and the force, a fighting chance to deliver the mission within that. And at the moment, I'll be really honest with you, looking at the impact of 4.6% settlement, it sets us some way back from that ambition. We will be playing catch up for years to come in that realm. And I think that's a really important point, Mark.
Thanks, Alistair. Brian? Brian, then Stuart.
Yeah, and I think just on Craig's point around the industry stuff, so I think I would agree with everything you've kind of said, Lucy, in terms of the feedback that's coming back from rail partners. You know, all the stuff around reducing disruption, reliable railway, absolutely get that. But Hugh, you talked about, you know, 2% once upon a time being a thing. And that is something that is coming back from industry, and they are talking about that 2% figure. So just to give some context around some of the huge pressures they've got, that stuff is coming there. And I think where we are, I'm not sure it's different information, I think where we kind of are is that, yes, they want more BTP, but it's more aspects of certain parts of BTP, and there's probably other stuff that doesn't necessarily, that BTP do, that doesn't necessarily support those objectives. So yes, they want more, but I don't know if they want all of it. And when you start looking at some of the areas that BTP have delved into over the years for potentially really good reasons, but they don't necessarily align. So I think we've got an industry position where some parts of the industry at least are saying 2%. That isn't the authority position, as we've heard from you, but there are some huge pressures there which Abdul touched upon, and therefore it does feel like to present 9.8 is a huge gap from some parts of the industry. So I get, you know, some people will say, well, you can't sort of, you know, have your cake and eat it and all the rest of it. But I think we need to be mindful that there are parts of the industry that are quoting around that. So in that context, the, you know, Hugh's position outlined around the 4.6 almost feels like a bit of a compromise between the two. And I know that Lucy's point around, you know, some of the stuff that you would have to stop is difficult to stop. So I think the industry fully supports the multi-year approach, because it is very difficult to, right, I'm going to turn this off and turn that off because, as you say, redundancy bill alone. I do get that. And that's something that, you know, the industry wants and TfL wants around multi-year deals and all that. That's a common trend. So, yeah, I suppose that hopefully, Craig, that just helps cover that gap. And I'm not sure there is actually as much of a difference as to what Lucy said as we think. But I don't know if anybody else would.
Trisha's got her hand up.
Thank you very much, Chair. Can I first let me just say a big thank you to Lucy and Steph. I thought your presentations were both incredibly clear and very kind of packed with substance. And I think what you're hearing around the table, Lucy, is a lot of empathy for where you took us at the end on the need to think hard about getting more of a multi-year financial framework in place, think hard about what is the kind of long-term organisational model, what is the financial strategy that gets us towards sustainability. And certainly listening to Brian, it seems to me that there is absolutely, as part of that, a need to completely re-engineer the way in which we think about industry feedback, because as an authority member, it's incredibly difficult to sit here, Lucy and Brian, and hear different things with different messages coming from different people around the room. So I think there is an absolute task to be done, you know, coming out of this conversation. But we have a job to do today as well. And the job to do today is to kind of look at the budget for next year. And I have to say, when I looked at the kind of material for the meeting, yeah, the proposal that came forward from the executive was at the higher level of my expectations. I mean, and that is shaped by sitting on a number of different public sector boards, hearing the conversations that are going on around those boards, organisations trying to manage within generally a flat cash or worse environment, organisations launching and running severance schemes, and also in most cases being asked to absorb national insurance changes as part of their core budgets rather than receiving extra funding to do them. So, you know, I get that we need to do something for the long term, but you know, for me, what Hugh's recommendation felt already at the upper end of what I was expecting, given kind of the wider conversation in the public sector. And I kind of totally get that that's difficult, but it's difficult everywhere and for many essential public services that have a huge effect on quality of life. So I'm finding this a really difficult conversation. And I think it's going to be, however we end up, it's going to be, you know, a really uncomfortable place for all of us. Thank you.
Stuart, then Fiona.
Thank you, Chair. Well, first of all, the RPI is 3.4% in October. I mean, and I don't know what the trajectory will be, but maybe it will dip down a little bit. So I agree with Tricia that 4.6 is not generous, but I think it's quite pragmatic and practical given the circumstances. I was a bit concerned to hear that we can't debate what's in the efficiency block in public. I'd like to know a little bit more about what that 2% entails in forensic detail, because I don't think we can really make a decision as between 4.6 and 9.8 unless we know a bit more about that. But I just got two specific points. One is about flexible working within the context of the optimised policing model. Is it the position of the whole of the COG and the Chief Constable that this is non-negotiable, flexible working? Because my understanding is that it might have ramifications for revenue funding, and it might be very, very difficult to deliver. And the other thing is, what specific efforts are being made? And I know that the Chief Constable appeared at the Transport Select Committee in July 2022 and talked about some of these issues around technology and drones and suicide prevention, but what specific issues within the context of the financial settlement are we looking at in terms of collaboration with other forces? It's the perennial issue around, I mean, we'll come on to later about spending significant amounts of money on legal advice, but you know, collaboration on legal advice and other areas, because to my mind, that's important as well. But I think I need to know more about efficiency. But with all that said, I am minded to support the 4.6% because I don't think 9.8% is tenable given the current climate.
Do you want to answer the two specific questions?
So yeah, just in relation to the detail here, Stuart, that's in the paper, but we wouldn't put it into a public forum because some of that relates to legal issues in terms of redundancies, and other aspects of it you will see is around our capability for dealing with specialist threats. So it is in the paper for members to know what the risk is if you are to settle on a lower settlement. There are some very significant aspects of that. You know, I do 4.6% from our perspective. You know, we think that that is an unacceptable risk to passengers and industry. I think the point that Tricia makes and also Stuart, you touched on in terms of industry feedback. You know, I'm not in the habit of presenting things that aren't factually correct around what industry has told us. And when I have dealt with very senior people across industry, they are quite horrified at the thought of some of the reduction in service that they will receive from BTP. If you look at it, there'll be no BTP presence between Preston and Scotland. That's, you know, so if you take Avanti, the concerns that they will have in relation to that. Some of the other aspects in terms of violence against women and girls and where we will have to make some cuts, they find unpalatable. And these are senior people in the rail sector linked, as I said, with ORR, GBR, Network Rail and MDs through the Network Performance Board. And Sean, you were at the board. I don't know if you want to give a bit more of a reflection around the strength of industry.
Yeah, absolutely, if I may, Chair. So, because picking up on that point and our requirement to deliver an effective police force under legislation, that bill picks up the point, or makes the point that 9.8 probably would not be palatable, certainly with industry. Having sat on the last 3 network policing boards with MDs,
with owning group MDs on there. What is absolutely not palatable to that group of people is BTP not significantly shifting our approach to disruption, not significantly improving performance to disruption. And members will recall from a few previous presentations from myself, our current operating model, as we've heard today, is an operating model based on the gate line, based on the concourse, protecting staff, all of the vulnerabilities there. Disruption does not occur at the gate line, disruption does not occur on the concourse. In order to significantly shift our operating response, proactive response, not response to emergencies on the network of disruption, what seniors, MDs, CEOs are actually asking us to do to be out there proactively absolutely relies on the delivery of the OPM, absolutely relies on the growth through innovation and growth, absolutely relies on 9.8%.
Okay, thank you, Sean.
So,
John,
yeah.
I'll take Fiona, please.
So look, I agree with Trish. This is not easy, and it's never easy. I think we need a strategic conversation with senior industry. We get very different feedback. We've had feedback from Network Rail and TfL on their position, which doesn't align. So that there's clearly a disconnect somewhere that we need to iron out. And I think the only way to do that is to get into a strategic CSR style discussion around actually what does the shape look like, what's important, and how do we build that. I think that is a longer term piece. I think everybody, it doesn't matter where you work across the public sector at the minute, bouncing in year-to-year settlements means you can't make long-term decisions, you're having to make in-year cuts. It's all very challenging, and I think everybody recognises that. What I would say is, I think while industry might be saying they don't want to have some of the, they also don't want to pay the money. So this is where we have to have a very honest conversation back, which is, how do we, within an envelope, say, well, this is what we can provide, and this is what we're not. And I think one of the challenges that none of us know yet is where the pay review settlements will come from central government. So at the minute, there's a lot of rumour, there's a lot of conjecture about where they may sit, but no one's given any direction on that. And I know this year that was a big challenge for the force and for the authority in terms of it was higher than what anyone predicted, as was, you know, sort of, it was a surprise at where it came out. So we also don't know that. So there are unknowns in here, including the national insurance bit. But I think 4.6 is sensible. I think the piece on national insurance, I think also needs to be considered holistically and understood whether or not that should, you know, I think Hugh's saying he's had advice saying we can charge it because it's a true cost. And I think what I would like to see, which we haven't yet, we've seen a 3% modelling in the deck, and we've seen obviously a 9.8, and we've seen a 0 flat cash. But actually, if it is 4.6%, how do we have a storyboard of, well, this is what this now means, and actually do we need to reallocate resources to the things that industry are finding particularly sort of where we come.
Can I come in on that last point,
Yeah,
John? I think that's really important. So some of that, Fiona, we just don't have a choice. You know, industry are not having detailed conversations with us necessarily in the VORG space and some of the other areas that we have to deal with in terms of risk. You know, we are a public service, but we're a police force. There are things that we have to deal with. We do not, you know, in legislation, we can't choose not to do some of the work that we have to do. So that's why, you know, I think there is, you know, from an industry perspective, I mean, you know, certainly I would say Network Rail were horrified when I pointed out to them how many murders we've had this year on the railway. You know, that for them is an unacceptable position, but they rightly have an assumption that we are dealing with that. You know, their priority is in relation to disruption, but there is an absolute acceptance that we are dealing with violence against women and girls, you know, that we are dealing with some of the other crime that comes in, the vulnerability, the missing children, the children that are being used for sexual exploitation and being moved around the country on the railway network. They understand that. So we don't have, there is nothing else to reprioritise, and I think that's what Alistair's touching on, that the OPM is our opportunity this year to be able to deal with the demands and the expectations of industry. You know, and when we're talking about the percentage, you know, we talk about it as a percentage, but when we actually talk about the cost at circa 28 million out of the billions of pounds worth of investment in industry, and we are seeking to bring down the cost of Schedule 8 payments that take place and improve passenger satisfaction. You know, you heard in my piece, you know, that cost industry 108 million last year in terms of cost, and also millions of passengers that are losing confidence in the railway. And this, you know, our investment proposal of circa 28 million seeks to address that by making sure we have a model that is going to reduce disruption but maintain our delivery in relation to particularly violence against women and girls. I do not find that an optional part of our business.
Okay, thank you. Hold on, before we're starting to get people very interested in this. Charlie, you've had your hand up for a long time. Then the three amigos, then down the centre.
Thank you, Chair. So Lucy's touched on the scale issue and also, I think, on Brian's earlier point. You know, I'd love to think we do stuff that we need to do, but largely we're doing stuff that we're legislated to do or stuff that actually the public expects us to do, absolutely. So I think we've always got that fine balancing act between our responsibilities to policing the rail network from an industry perspective, and disruption and managing the safe, efficient running of the railway, and also our sort of public duty responsibility in terms of what the public rightly expects when, you know, they are using our services. So I think we are having to sort of serve two masters, if you like, and there is no, I assure you, optional stuff within there. Just very quickly picking up on Adam's earlier point, I absolutely accept the sort of Chancellor's position, but I don't think even the Chancellor expects that departments would necessarily make those reductions equitably across their services. You know, if I had to wait an extra couple of weeks for my driving licence to turn up and my passport, I'm probably not going to be that worried. If my hospital appointment's moved, which it has been several times, I sort of accept that it's just part of it. In terms of emergency service, I don't get the choice of whether or not I'm going to rock up like tomorrow or the day after or the day after that. Generally, if people call us, they need to see us now. Something's happening, they need protection. So I think there is a real difference in terms of where those efficiencies need to fall within public services in particular, because some of those things you can plan well ahead, particularly around some of the big sort of investment pieces. For those sort of blue light emergency service in particular, there is an expectation that we are there when people need us. And that means that we don't have the luxury of being able to sort of necessarily decide where we do or where we don't. Because every time we don't, that's a gap that presents a risk to the public.
Okay. Can we go to Ian next, then Paula, then Alistair?
So thank you, Chair. We've talked a lot today earlier about technology and enabling us to manage demand and actually possibly reduce demand or certainly make things work with possibly lower headcount longer term. That looks to the future, and this document, while called a medium-term financial plan, is still really not much more than a one-year budget. And I'm, having come new to the authority last year and seen the equivalent of this straight away, I'm slightly disappointed we haven't gone a bit further in developing a longer 3 or 5 year plan out of this by this stage, because I know there was some talk about that. So thinking about all of that, at this stage, and given what I'm hearing around the room, what is it that the Chief Constable thinks she needs, and the Chief Executive think we need to turn this into a proper 3-year plan? And what is it that the authority can do to assist both in year, if this goes ahead at the recommended level, to make sure it's delivered with appropriate help to sort that, but also to plan that 3 years? Is there financial headroom? Is there structural things that we can change? What other things do we need to do to help that?
Well, no, it's a very good question, but I mean, we need to talk some more about how we do it together. I think that's a $61 million question, and I don't want to give you a good answer. And if it had been easy, we would be doing it. It would be in front of you now.
We can certainly come back. It's a good point. Yeah,
I suppose. Okay. Chief Executive doesn't want to answer it directly. Is there something we can do at the fringes of budget to assist with a fund that helps that transformation be speeded up? Is there something we can do to speed up the pace of technology-enabled projects that are not allowed change?
Well, I do think, I mean, one, you know, what I could have said at the end of my spiel was that I do accept the kind of level that I'm recommending that doesn't look like there's enough money for investment in there. And that is, you know, it's not very surprising to anyone, and you can feel the tautness in that 4.6%. So, question, what do we do about that? And I think we have to divorce that from the kind of annual conversation we're having now about business as usual. I feel, I mean, you know, I've got to keep talking to Rebecca about this, but I feel we have sort of more flexibility about the timing of that. Like, you know, at whatever point, you know, BTP and ourselves came together with an investment proposal, you know, and I do think we're talking about handfuls of millions, you know, maybe into the terms of, it depends on what time period we're looking over, then we may be able to fund it. You know, we may be able to commit to funding it, either because we will be able to say we're going to be charging it out next year, or because there is still a little bit left in the reserves, or because you know, we're going to have a spending review and there is going to be some capital available in DFT at some point when that falls out. So to take the time pressure off, I'd be like, let's have a piece of work in parallel where we're looking at these investments which aren't going to get squeezed out by this business as usual talks every year. So you know, my first thing is to say we don't have to do it at the same time scale. We can do it in parallel, and you know, whenever we're ready, I feel like we have flexibilities on how we fund things. And I would, because that kind of forward thinking is certainly getting squeezed out by the current process. And I think you've all said that.
Paula.
Yes. So can I just start with thanking Lucy and colleagues for the work, because I think you've set out in real granularity the challenges and the options here. But I think it's also equally clear that at the bottom line, this is a business that's driven by headcount. And I'm quite taken with what Lucy told us at the last meeting, which is in the minutes, that she sees a smaller force once it's digitally enabled in the future. It seems to me what we all need to be doing is working towards that, understanding what digitally enabled means, and what a smaller force looks like, because then it's much easier to have a conversation with industry about what we're all trying to do. And I wonder whether I was a little bit disappointed when this came under the heading of the midterm financial plan 2025 to 2030, because it isn't. It's next year's budget. But it feels to me incredibly difficult to have this conversation whilst not having the other conversation about what does a smaller force digitally enabled look like, how do we get industry to support that, and then how do we as an authority support that in the short term, because I think there are two things we need to do. One is understand what that might mean in terms of any redundancy and how quickly we could put that money away, make that money available, and the other is what sort of technology investment, but I suspect that's going to be a multi-year strategy. So it feels like if we were to have that conversation, then it's much easier to look at what does next year look at. But at the moment, looking at something that adds another 70 onto the headcount feels really difficult if we're aiming for a long-term world in which we're looking at a smaller force, because we're baking in costs that's then going to incur further costs to take it out again.
Alistair?
Thank you. I've had probably sort of 12 minutes to reflect on Brian's original comments and sort of reach for a chamomile tea around industry feelings on delivering optional policing services. Charlie, I think, has covered the point mainly, but you know, I would be really interesting to understand where industry feel that we've reached into areas that aren't necessarily in policing. We don't deliver optional policing services. You know, we are, as I sit here, really down to the bare bones of what we can deliver. And you know, Charlie's made the point. You know, we can't debate, or can we choose not to turn up when we need it by the public, and that goes all the way back to common law, duty of care, and responsibility of the chief constable. So you know, we need to dismiss from industry any notion that we're delivering optional policing services. That's really, really important. The point I'd like to make as well, and again it has been touched on, there is an assumption I think across members of the authority around assumptions on equity of efficiency within the industry. And whilst we are part of the DFT at an arm's length place, we're an emergency service. And therefore, you know, we cannot choose to stop doing certain things, and that thinking has to be, in my view, refined. The optimised policing model is key to the future of the force. We already operate on really fine margins on officer numbers across places like C and D. You'll be aware of that. And what we've built into our ask on budget settlement is an operational viability factor that enables us to keep bases open, to make us relevant and actually improve our efficiency around disruption and delay. And I genuinely think, I'll say it's not for dramatic effect, but these are facts. You know, the fact we've listed 17 potential station closures here is not shroud-weighted. That's the reality of not getting that additionality, because we will not be able to cover the shifts, the rosters, or indeed the hours that are required to be viable there. So I think potentially, my view is, you know, the 4.6% lining with industry's thinking is, I think, an act of potential self-harm for us all here if we want to support industry's ambition around disruption and delay. The 5-point plan, Steve Murphy had briefed us all on and outlined, you know, we're sort of committed to delivering on that, points 4 and 5. It's just not an option for us to walk away from that, and I think 4.6 will be an act of self-harm.
I'll come back to you, Ian. Can I have Andy, then Nick, then Brian, please?
I think on this longer term financial planning, I mean, I said it earlier, I'll say it again, the easy bit that the government are doing at the moment, taking back the franchises, ain't going to be difficult. That's easy. What happens to GBR beyond that, goodness only knows. But I suspect, as those people come under one body, operator of last resort, or whatever development that comes, that's the time to start talking to that single body which will have the budget effectively for the railway industry about how we can be more effective by financially planning over a 2 or 3 year time horizon. And that's an opportunity now. So all the other great stuff that you think might come with GBR, frankly, I think it's for the birds, and I would focus on that and nothing else, because it's the thing that's giving us most concern and probably got the biggest bang for the buck. If I could just make one other point. And Alistair's just had a go at it with these policing stations. We're a railway police force. We need to be an efficient railway police force. And given that the pressures on policing generally in terms of funding at the moment are severe, and it's difficult for everybody, not just our Chief Constable, we can't and we shouldn't, I don't think, go around, you know, however publicly or not, talking about closing most of C and D and pretending that the other forces are going to pick it up. Because if disruption and the certainty of train service is important, those are the bits as a railway police force we can't cut. And the bits that we think, and you're probably right because you are the experts, not me, but to pretend that every call for assistance has to be responded to if life and limb don't happen to be at risk, you know, it just isn't so. And B division is where half our crimes and our problems are. But not all of those calls are life and limb. Some of them are about disruption. But if we close off most of the UK, we're no longer a national police force effectively, and we'll be under much greater threat, and performance will definitely drop. So to go out talking about the ultimate is those stations have got to close, I think is unhelpful, even if that's what you actually think at the moment. Because it really undermines us being a railway police force.
Thanks. Nick?
So, can I share a couple of frustrations first and then ask a question? So my frustrations as someone who doesn't work in the industry is I'm getting conflicting evidence and I operate on evidence, that's what my profession is. And I'm told things by people I trust and I'm told different things by professionals in this room that I have huge respect for. So I haven't got an evidence base to base it on. If I had a letter from every managing director, head of Network Rail, TfL saying, I'm happy for a 10% increase, I vote for 9.8% in a blink of an eye. Equally, if I had a letter saying anything more than 2% is unpalatable and it means we're going to have to cut rail services and we're going to have to close railway stations, then I'd be coming at it from a different place. So that's unhelpful. I share every colleague's concern, and I suspect every member of COG's concern, and no doubt Richard's concern, that all we do is talk about next year. We don't ever talk about the year after that. And I find that incredibly frustrating because this is the third year I've been through this dance. And I guess we'll be doing the same next year unless we can do something different. And that's frustrating me. But the questions I've got and the comment I've got is this, and I have the opportunity to pick Lucy's brains on a bit over dinner. But BTP do not operate in a policing vacuum. It's not the only police force in the country. There's overlaps between police forces. there's common ground between police forces. And as a member of the public, I don't look at the cap badge if I need a police officer any more than I look at which health trust the ambulance turns up from or which fire service turns up. You know, they want a police officer or a PCSO or the person from forensics. They don't care who they belong to, they just want to know they're going to be there. So my two challenges, and they're not questions that solve an in-year problem, but I think we should be looking at them in the not too distant future, are these. And they're not rocket science. One is, are we sure our headquarters is as lean as it can be? Because headquarters in all organisations I've ever worked in grow because there's a project and we need people to do X, and then we never actually let go of them, and they hang around. Or does it? So is our headquarters as lean as it could be? Because if it isn't, it should be. Headquarters should always be lean, because what matters is people out in Lancaster Police Station or Dundee Police Station. That's why we exist. And my second question and challenge is, what are we doing about collaborations? Frankly, why does British Transport Police, for example, need its own HR function? Why can't we be sharing it with the City of London or Ministry of Defence Police or somebody else? And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with British Transport Police's HR function, but to me as a citizen, it seems madness that we've got all these police forces that have lots and lots of what are commonly known, and again I'm not trying to be disrespectful, as back office functions, and we're paying for them over and over and over again. And we've got to break that cycle, because if we don't, I just fear that I'll be long gone, and my successors in 5-10 years time will still be having a debate. So I really recommend and urge people to look at what can we do in terms of collaboration, what can we do in terms of streamlining HQ, because they're two obvious cost savings for me that aren't attacking the front line.
Chair, could I just respond to an important point, if I may, just on that, the operational point. So you're absolutely right, Nick, of course, factually regarding BTP's ground overlays with other Home Office forces. But what we hear on a almost daily basis from our senior colleagues at Chief Officer level, when we reach out, is keeping the railway moving, getting the railway moving again in points of disruption is absolutely not a priority for Home Office forces. They are absolutely clear with us on that. We receive numerous correspondence every year from colleagues in Home Office forces showing us the number of incidents they have attended on our behalf, and then discussions regarding about cross-charging us for those services as well. So that's a really important point. We would absolutely love to have joined up services, but what policing history will show over the last 2 decades is that that approach has been taken, and happy to be corrected, but I think in almost every single case nationally, those collaborations have failed.
Well, can I just come back on that with a different example, which the Chair and I will remember. So the armed forces protected their independence like nothing else. There is now one Service Discipline Act. There is one Joint Service Personnel system. So where there is a will and where there's an imperative, there is a way. And you know, yes, I'm aware of the history of police forces over the last umpteen years, but I don't say this in a pejorative way, but we all like protecting our turf.
Exactly, and with respect, the armed forces don't have 43 independently elected police and crime commissioners who want their own independence.
Heaven help them if they did.
Sorry, Chair, can I come on this point? There have been a number of attempts to collaborate on policing, and unfortunately they've all been unwound. The Home Secretary has just announced a police reform, which is going to look at, as you termed it, back office functions and bringing them together. So there is a new impetus in policing. At the same time, GBR is looking at collaboration and also bringing back office functions again together. So there are 2 new nascent approaches where we can look at that. We're certainly open to it. We reach out often to other forces to ask them to collaborate. At the moment, you know, in the past it's always been no, but I'm hoping now that we can do that. I'm certainly open to that. When I was in the civil service before I was in part of civil service HR, shared payroll functions and things like that. So as a force, we're open to it. We just have to have other bodies willing to collaborate.
Okay, Abdul?
I think touching on what has been said about talks, I think what would be helpful is we have some sort of roadshow and breakfast briefings where we hear directly from them, because the conflicting information really is not quite a concern to me, because how am I meant to make a judgment? And Nick's rightly pointed out that there are discrepancies in evidence. And then you've got, I think, touching upon other efficiencies, about legal efficiencies. They outsource currently everything. And that, I think, is quite right for having potentially an in-house legal team. So currently, where I'm sitting at, taking into account that last year was 10.9%, where I'd be sitting at is a 4.6% we absorb, the national insurance contributions, in line with, other talks that our customer base happen to do the same. So that's where I'd be sitting at in terms of a ledger proposal.
Thanks, Abdul. Hold that thought. Can I have Stuart and then Ian?
Yeah, first of all, I'm not sure I agree about collaboration. I mean, my own experience locally, Hertfordshire, Bedfordshire, Cambridgeshire serious crimes have amalgamated and collaborated for 20 years, and it's been very successful. That is just one example. On the issue of what we're being asked, we're talking about what's a non-core and core item, and I've corresponded with the Chief Constable on this. Impact the operational effectiveness, and I think it's reasonable for us to have had a breakdown of what those are, which I have not had, despite writing to the Chief Constable and copying in Rachel. And I do think, it's not helpful to say to look at the worst case scenario when there are still other savings which we need to know about.
I've offered to meet with you twice, Stuart.
You haven't written to me. I don't want a meeting with you. I've never asked for a meeting. With respect, I asked the Chief Constable to give me a breakdown. She's not done that. You haven't done that. I don't need a high-level briefing. And I also think, in terms of governance, it's not appropriate in respect of Operation Siren to say it's confidential, that programme, and we can't discuss it at all, but come and have a private meeting. That isn't the way you should do things. There is a degree of accountability and transparency, and I think we should uphold that.
But I think if I could come in just chair on that. So sure, I think that the offer, sort of well-meaning offer from Rachel to meet and brief on that was a reasonable offer. I think when you talk about Oxfam, we're in public session at the moment. There are reasons why I wouldn't want to reveal any detail, in fact, even discuss it in this meeting. But again, I'm more than happy to provide that detail outside in a non-public session or on a one-to-one. But I think we've just got to be slightly careful around some of the issues we're raising that impact on staff, and staff may not be aware of. Sure.
No, I accept that, but just for the avoidance of doubt, because I checked this, the handling instructions were no restriction on circulation, and the security classification was official. So that was the public paper table on the 1st of October. I think it's a reasonable question to ask. If those potential cashable savings are being rolled over into the next financial year, 25-26, I think it's reasonable, given that they're non-core items, and we're being asked to make that decision between 4.6 and 9.8%, that we know that they are elucidated a little bit better than me being offered a meeting. Though I'm sure it would be delightful with Rachel, I have not been advised on what those budget headings are.
Okay, let's just hold those thoughts at the moment. We're conscious of time, and a lot of people want to say things. So, Emir.
I just wanted to make the point, it was an aspiration of COG and the Chief that some years ago that you would start to look at innovation. You always knew that was really, really important. Mm-hmm. And I was absolutely amazed when I wrote to the CTO and they told me that actually not a penny goes into innovation because we're simply doing the infrastructure, we haven't got enough money. Mm-hmm. So this is not a discussion that's coming today. It's a discussion of many years. And I think COG would have been aware that we would reach this point where we would say, goodness, there's absolutely nothing that we've got. And for that reason, I think it's absolutely right what the accounting officer suggested. They've been as pragmatic as they could. At the end of the day, we are part of an ecosystem, and we like to think, okay, we're a tiny bit, but we are a part. You heard me push DFT the other day on saying it seems perverse that you will have GPR, you could have efficiencies, and they were very clear, it doesn't matter. The point is, at this point, this is the sort of cuts we're looking at. And therefore, I feel it's right that we are pragmatic. And if that makes us hurt, we have to accept it. Because then, going to some of the point, do we need to look at those harsher environmental redundancies or whatever it is, then we have to do it. Simply that we can survive and then look at what we are forced to do in terms of innovation to make this a better force.
Can I just come back in that one? So you're not, in fairness, you're not hurting us, you're hurting the rail industry and you're hurting passengers. So we can only deliver innovation, we can only carve it out within the budget envelope that you give us. That's your role as an authority to give us a funding envelope. We have a professional responsibility to present to you the consequences of some of the decisions that you may make. And I've always had an ambition, it was my pitch as the Chief Constable, to drive forward in terms of digital innovation, in terms of technological innovation, but you simply have never given us the funding in order for us to be able to do that. And I'm not willing to do that at the expense of delivering core policing services that protect the public. So I think it's really unfair to say that, almost sort of insinuate that we're being sort of apathetic about driving that forward. You give us a financial settlement. It's my responsibility with the Chief Officer Group to carve that up. Protecting the public is absolutely front and centre of what we do. And all of these discussions you're talking about, you know, we are talking about a £28 million uplift in spending across a multi-billion pound industry. And for us to lose 286 people in order for, because you will equally hold me to account to deliver on budget. So you will say, we've given you the budget, you need to deliver on budget. So that is 286 fewer people. And what I am saying to you all very clearly, hopefully, is we can only achieve that by stopping recruitment. We cannot do an organisational restructure, which is what we would do in order, over a multi-year period, we could aim to get to a position where we have got a lesser headcount and we are delivering a different organisation. A 4.6% settlement. If you make that decision today, we have not told you the operational consequences of that because we were only aware of the 4.6% during midweek last week as the recommendation. We have told you the consequences of a 3%. It's going to be in the similar sort of area, but there are significant operational consequences by freezing in such a blunt way in terms of freezing recruitment. And I personally do find it irresponsible to think that we're just going to turn off recruitment, save 286 people and continue to provide a service that protects the public and detects criminality and brings offenders to justice and, importantly, keeps the railway moving. And I am very concerned. This is against a backdrop of rising crime. You know, you see that. The force analytics are there for you to understand that this is not against a diminishing return in terms of crime. Crime is rising, disruption is rising, fatalities are rising, and at the moment I am not in the business of telling you that the industry are concerned if they're not. You know, I don't need to do any dramatics around it. Industry are concerned that they are going to get less from British Transport Police, and I'm talking at a very senior level of industry who are our budget holders, and some of these people own the majority of the money that you charge out. They are the main budget holders, and I think that from a transparency perspective, it is important that we share with them the consequences of the decision. And I think 4.6%, you know, I come back to £108 million cost to industry last year of disruption. And the difference in that cost, that, you know, between 4.6% and 9.8% is what, circa 10 million. But actually, what it will do from an economic impact, it will mean that the disruption, Schedule 8 payments are likely to be more significant. And, you know, I do get Andy's point around, you know, I thought with the Chief Officer team, we debated long and hard as to whether or not we wanted to share with you potentially where the station closures are. But I work on the basis of transparency with industry and transparency with the public, and it, you know, would be remiss of us not to be clear what the impact of your decision making is likely to be. And I think we've articulated that in the paper, and I've repeated it again today. And I do want you to understand the impact. There's no drama with this. We're just very clear that this is what the impact will be.
Thanks, Lucy. Brian, and then we're going to have a 5-minute break, and we'll come back to this.
Yeah, and I, you know, people have talked about inconsistency from industry based on what, you know, the Chief said, what you've said, Sean. I don't necessarily see that. Everything that Lucy said, everything that Sean said, I think rings true absolutely. I suppose the million-dollar question for me is, when those industry conversations have been had, do they know that the cost of that is that extra 28 million and it is the 9.8%? So they're very clear, and that's good. Okay.
They've seen the exact same chart that you've seen today.
Okay, and then I suppose going back to Hugh's point that we was talking about earlier, if we're saying at the minute that we're 5.9%, including the NI, which is 4.6, if that's what we're saying we are at the minute from an authority recommendation, is there some scope that there is a separate budget that exists at authority level or something like that, that Lucy and the team could draw upon for some of the really important stuff that industry want? You mentioned drones could be sacrificed by this 4.6, you know, other stuff where there's a business case, you know, I don't know if there's some kind of DFT budget you talked about, Hugh, that could say, well, you know what, Schedule 8 business case would do something. You know, is there something that can sit, not necessarily with BTP, but with BTPA that could be drawn upon, that gives us some ability to keep some of the really important stuff going, whether that's in the crime space, whether that's in the industry space. And then I suppose the final point, and I know this is not something we'll solve today, but just thinking about the strategic longer term stuff, you know, what's really sad to me, we've talked about it before, I suspect that gap between the 5.9 and the 9.8 that we're currently at, you know, there will be huge amounts of money going out of the rail industry on private security that will be more than eclipse that gap. And it's just really, really sad that that's happening from the same people that you're talking to, and that could not be redirected into make the shortfall. I know we won't solve that this year, but how do we get to a point of making that case to some of these really senior people who are making those decisions? And it feels like there's a huge opportunity with GBR and, you know, lobbying ministers, whoever we need to do to stop some of that, because, you know, if I just think about the line I'm responsible for, you've got network rail security, you've got TfL security, you've got private security from operators, you've got Greater Anglia, all operating a small bit in addition to the BTP. It's often not coordinated, they won't have access to the intelligence, the thing like that. So it's not something we'll solve today, but that is something that's really sad, and really welcome Hugh's thoughts after the break on if there's anything we can put in an authority budget that BTP could come back to this authority and say, look, we really need to draw upon this, because otherwise you're not having your drones, or you're not having this, or I don't know if that's even an option, Hugh, but...
Right, thanks, Brian. We'll take a 5-minute break now, back at 15:15, and we will carry on this discussion. So go on around these screens, but clear and free debate. I want to give this last opportunity to anybody who wants to add anything. Does anybody wish to say anything at this stage?
Ron, can I just make one point if I may?
Yeah.
So we've obviously discussed the difference between the 9.8 and the 4.6. A point that we'd really like to get across, even the decision today, if that was a lower one, it's really important for us all to remember that that won't be a saving back into the government. That money that we would save from the reduction that we would see in the budget won't be money going back into Treasury, because it will still be money within the rail industry that they'll continue to spend. Picking up similar onto Brian's point, that we know that gap will be filled by industry spending that the same money for less of a service, less of an outcome, less outcomes for criminal justice.
Why do we say that, sorry?
Because of security guards.
Because they'll spend, industry will still spend that money to deliver on disruption. So they've told us that by buying more security guards, buying more asset in that space. They won't reduce their own money or give money back to Treasury because our budget has been reduced for what we want. It will still be spent, it won't be a saving.
Alistair?
Thanks, Ron. Yeah, I was reflecting on the discussions around industry voice, for want of a better expression, and the views of industry on the budget settlement. And I guess I'm slightly surprised that there's that less informal way in which views have been submitted. And if I was to put this into sort of policing parlance and the national decision model, have we got the information intelligence that we need to make a decision on this? It appears to me the answer is no, quite frankly. If we're not clear on what the industry view of this is, how on earth could we collectively agree on a figure, number one? I think that's really important. I don't know whether you, from yourselves, but certainly, we've spoken to industry, as Lucy's alluded to, sort of face-to-face on that. Have there been any formal submissions? Have we had anything from industry formally submitted to the authority expressing a view on the budget settlement, the impact on the force?
No, I think all we've had are 2 letters just saying that they're very keen to see a proper settlement for the force, but no question of any money or no position or anything like that. There's nothing even that we draw to attention. We would have published it if there was anything substantive.
So the sort of proper settlement bit is really, to me, important. So that proper settlement in what context? Because we know that the industry have signed up to the 5-point plan, for example, around disruption. We know that they've signed up to the ministerial priorities when disruption, delay, fraud, and more. So what does a proper settlement mean? And I guess if I was put in a position here for policing operations goal, I wouldn't be able to make a decision at the moment based on the information that I've been provided with, and we would be tasking that back out. I know it's putting it into police terms, but surely the same applies in this case.
And just to add to that, I'm a bit worried that now that Lucy and Sean have confirmed that they've actually tabled that figure, and it's different, as very different, I am wondering if there's an option for us to adjourn to get that feedback before we make a decision, because essentially...
All I can say, the authority has to set a budget in legislation. The only 2 people the authority has to consult are the Chief Constable and the Treasurer. So I believe you've consulted the Chief Constable and the Treasurer. There's no obligation to consult the industry on that score. And I would say, I've sort of listened to the debate about the views of industry. I mean, industry is a fragmented beast. It is not surprising that if you speak to different people across the rail industry that you would hear different things. And I think that's why the authority exists, to make these judgments. And so you can have the conversations you can have, but in the end it is the job of the authority to set a budget, and the authority must consult the Chief Constable, and the authority must consult the Treasurer.
I mean, I don't think that's absolutely right. I mean, we wouldn't want to dispute this, but surely it is in the interest of everyone to get the roundest and fullest picture around this before going to decision queue. And given the pressure that is on the industry to deliver on disruption and delay, and we know that the industry will see BTP as an integral part of that, the decision that the authority comes to surely must be informed by their views.
And I also, if the department doesn't like the decision the authority makes, the department has the power in law to change that decision the authority makes, say to increase the budget for BTP or to decrease it. And for all intents and purposes, the department is the industry, financially, at the moment. By far and away the biggest stakeholder is the pot of money held by the department. So that would be that's the kind of fallback position. If they don't agree with the decision the authority makes, they can change it.
But is there not that point that Sean's just made? If they are then going to go and spend that money elsewhere anyway, does that...
I think that's the point that I made earlier, which is you should think of, the budget you set is taking away money from running the railway. So it isn't giving it back to the taxman. I quite agree. There's Treasury and DFT have come to a view, this is how much money will be spent on the railway. Some of it's from fares and some of it's from the taxpayer. You are just taking some of that, which means it's not for the railway to run. If you don't take it, the railway can indeed spend it on what they like. They might want to spend it on security guards, they might want to spend it on running trains, they might want to spend it on anything because it is their money.
But, sorry, Chair, but with respect to policing the railway is part of running the railway. Essentially, it's not separate to, it's not taking money from, it is essential to running an efficient and effective railway. As you've heard earlier on our disruption, the railway relies heavily in terms of response to disruption. And what you're suggesting there as well, this is going to be a sort of a reduction in service. You don't think it's an enhancement in service?
I'm just saying that's how the money works, which is there is a pot of money available for running a railway, and the decision that it takes is that some of that will be allocated directly to BTP, and if you take less
there's more for running a railway, if you take more, there's less for running.
No, I understand that. My point being is that policing a railway is part of running a railway. It is not separate to.
I guess that's what comes out the same overall pot.
Oh, okay. With respect, we're now just about starting to go round in circles. I just want to put a summary in here so that we're clear that where we are now, and if anyone disagrees with me, then obviously they doesn't have a chance to say this. First of all, we have listened to the professional opinion of the force in terms of what they believe they need to deliver the service they believe the railway requires. And it's been quite impassioned at points, but it has been strongly argued, and we all recognise that. And we all recognise the position that we want a well-resourced and effective police force. No doubt about that. On the other hand, we have professional advice from the authority that says for a number of larger external factors, the settlement at around 9.8% is unaffordable, and that it should be a lesser settlement. The situation that we are faced with as an authority is that we have to make a decision regarding the budget. Let me start with a number of points that I think are helpful. First of all, there is no doubt from the discussion today between both the force and the authority there is a common view that we need to move from this single-year bum fight to a multi-year settlement situation. And I think we should therefore instruct the executive to take that away and see how actually that might be achieved in terms of the structure we have now and the constraints we have placed upon us by legislation. But the aim is to move to a multi-year settlement, which will allow us to have those bigger discussions. Are we all agreed on that?
Yes.
So hopefully this will be the last annual bun fight we have, because we'll get something else in place. Secondly, there is no doubt that there are strong feelings around this table both ways, or a number of ways. And it is important, therefore, that the full context of this decision, whatever it is communicated in detail both to our stakeholders and to ministers. What I therefore propose is that whatever is agreed here today, the implications of that decision today are communicated promptly and fully to ministers and promptly and fully to stakeholders, so that we all understand, our stakeholders and ministers understand, where we are, why we've got there, and what the decision has been. And it's incumbent on any or all of them to come back to us and make any comments. And there's still time, I think, for them to do that before we have to sort of start signing checks. The next thing relates to the harder part of today's discussion, and that relates to the percentage level at which we are prepared to settle with the force and give us a budget uplift. Before I do that, and before I ask your views on this, and this vote I must restrict to authority members, of course, as I'm sure you all know, there is a final chance. If anybody wishes to say anything or make any points, raise your hand now.
I need to clarify a point.
Of course, please.
My team rightly pointed out to me that I said we hadn't outlined the impact of the 4.6% settlement, when indeed we have. So I needed to make that really clear, that you have all got the information on the impact on BTP. I suppose the other point, if I may just come back on around the point about running the railway. Running a railway is also about protecting passengers in terms of, and I've specifically come back to violence against women and girls. And whilst it is the pot of money for running the railway, I would say that cannot be divorced from the fact that we have an absolute duty, and you as a members do have a duty to protect people from criminality. So I did want to make that point, that it's not just about running the railway, it is about protecting passengers. I really don't think we should not be here today with the commitment the government's made around violence against women and girls and knife-enabled crime and reducing the disruption. They are all equitably important to us in BTP, and it does remain our position that 9.8% will enable us to deliver the service that the railway requires and passengers need to keep them safe.
Thanks, Lucy.
And Ron, sorry, just on the point around there is sort of a window to confirm some of the stuff we've said. What is that final drop dead deadline when the cheque is to be signed?
Well, can I say, Ron, if it's helpful for members, if you make a decision at 4.6%, we will not be able to lift our recruitment, because we will have to be 286 people fewer in the organisation. So we will start to feel the impact of that decision immediately, because we will have to move in order to be able to deliver on that budget envelope. Because we can't do organisational change in a sort of informed way as we would want to do if it was a multi-year settlement, we won't be lifting recruitment, and we would have to move quite quickly to closing some of the stations, because there is no other way to achieve exiting 286 people from the organisation, and that will of course again be, against the backdrop of rising demand, rising disruption and rising fatality.
Okay.
Ron, can I just
hold on? Yes.
One point. Can I just back to Brian's suggestion? So, will we look at a separate pot of money that's held by the authority that looks at innovation, regardless of what the ultimate decision is?
I think we can happily do that.
Thank you.
I don't think we really answered Brian's question, which I'm also interested in. What is the timescale? If we make a decision today, we communicate to ministers and stakeholders, and then you said there's some time before we have to sign the cheque. How long is that period? Do you have an idea?
I mean, as it's a public meeting, we will be communicating the decision to our people today, and we would have to communicate to industry ourselves so that they start to understand the impact. I mean, we would have to do that.
And we'd highly probably need to have those stations closed for April because we wouldn't have the headcount to staff them.
So there you go, that gives you the picture of where we are. Right, we now come to crunch time. So I want to get this clearly minuted so that we have a proper and formal record of this. First of all, we are all, I think, agreed that we need to undertake work to change from an annual to a multi-year settlement to allow us to plan and strategise properly for the force. Are we agreed?
Yes.
We also agree that we will look at the possibility of obtaining or setting aside or providing innovation funding at a level to be agreed, but we will require further work by the authority to determine the feasibility of that proposal. Are we agreed on that?
Yes.
The next crunchy one is, again, I address my authority colleagues. Does anyone support the 9.8% proposal? Raise your hand if you do. Does anyone support the 4.6% proposal? Raise your hand if you do. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Thank you. Did you get all that?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. I want also to address the 3% NI?
Mm-hmm.
Should that be charged out on top of the 4.6% that you have just voted for? In favour?
Yes.
How many's that?
I think you could raise it out a bit higher, please. 9 votes out of 13.
Okay, so that's carried as well. So the decisions are these. First of all, we have agreed to work for a multi-year settlement. Secondly, we have agreed to look at the feasibility of setting aside some innovation money. Thirdly, that we will provide a budget uplift of 4.6%. Fourthly, that we will on top of that provide a charge out for the NI cost. Fifthly, I will write toot sweet to stakeholders and ministers to explain the backing to this decision and the implications of it, to allow them to cogitate, as it were, and come to allow them to come back to us if necessary. Does anyone have any further points they wish to make? Thank you very much. Can we move on, please, to the policing plan 25-27.
BTPA budget.
Sorry, apologies. The BTPA budget. Sorry, Rabila.
Thank you. This paper has already gone to SPC, where it was agreed to come to the full authority. The increase that we're proposing for the 25-26 budget compared to 24-25 is 2.8%, which is just marginally above CPI for next year. We've detailed out where the increases come from. Happy to take questions.
So given what we've just said around that we would ideally look to secure a pot of money, can we sign that?
So this is around, I would say, more the kind of administrative function, as opposed to if we were to get, say, through the SR next year, a pot of money, that will be done separately. So this isn't about kind of getting that capital investment separate fund. This is just about the administrative function of the members and the exec.
Any questions on that, please? Can we approve that proposal for the budget?
Yes.
Thank you. Policing plan 25-27, is that UK or is it Alistair?
I'll start. I don't take credit for the work that's been done from the policing plans. It very much is Kate and Jen Crowder that have been out doing the legwork on this. But I guess, bearing on the conversation we just had and the settlement we have arrived at, this takes on a slightly different perspective around what was originally planned. So I should say this will be subject to change, but the plan itself has been well consulted on. It does put a focus on safety action plans at a divisional and sub-divisional level, based on the feedback we've had from industry and stakeholders. It does incorporate much more measurable contribution from A and P division, for example, and it brings in a new raft of metrics around performance, which we hope we would find it easier to read. But I guess I'll hand over to Kate just to sort of articulate the volume of work and consultation that's gone into getting this place.
Thank you. Yeah, we've consulted across all of the subdivisions, across all of industry partners and passenger representative groups in a different way this year. So I would say we've gone in with more of a blank page than pre-formed ideas about what the priorities ought to be. Pretty much a consensus of opinion about trying to simplify and streamline the plans as they have been in the past. And the question for members is, the three priorities set out in the paper. So there's one specifically around disruption and delay, there's one specifically around crime, high harm and vulnerable, and then there's a specific one on violence and intimidation of women and girls, which we think is a reflection of what industry is asking of us, what the government's priorities are, and the national policing priorities. Do you think we've got that balance right? Happy to take any feedback on those priority areas identified.
Thank you very much. Any comments or questions on the policing plan?
Just,
yes,
if I may, Ron,
Andy.
I mean, in a past life I got involved with policing plans from the other side for years and years and years, and it was a bit of a tiresome process, I have to say, in a way. Even though the contact was good. I was one of the ones pushing for this 3-year kind of review. I think this is the best piece of work I've seen in what's really decades, both in terms of process and the way it's presented. So I think the work is just outstanding. It really is the best I've seen kind of in my career on this particular topic. Really good.
Good, thank you.
Can I make a point? I think we will need to revisit it in line with the recent settlement. So I don't think we can deliver everything we're necessarily committing to here. So I would ask that we can bring that back to the next authority meeting to just show you what we won't be able to do as a result of the settlement.
That's fine. Are we content with that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, we'll bring it back for the next meeting. Thank you very much. Race action plan, Rachel.
I'll take these papers as read. They're just important to note that we've refreshed the equality and inclusion strategy and also the race action plan.
Anyone, any points or questions for Rachel? I think the papers are pretty self-explanatory.
I'd just say I think this is really strong, and it would be good, I think, to get an update. We obviously did the away day, particularly around race, so it would be good to understand how things have moved forward in the force as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, I thought this was a really good piece of work.
Ron, I just had one question.
Yeah.
Sorry, I should have asked you this before. On page 136, you've got figures where it says applications, recruitment and leavers.
Sorry?
You've got, on page 136, you've got applications, recruitment, leavers, and I noticed in the recruitment it said females 37%, but the applications were only 32%, so I was trying to work out how that happened.
Women perform better at the selection process than men. I think that's what that data was showing. So we have less women applying, but they're more likely to get through the process than men.
All right, not so out of that 32%, 37%. No, is that right? Okay, thank you.
Any other comments or questions on the papers? I think, as again, I think they were pretty good. So can we note those, please?
Yep.
Thank you very much. New charging methodology. It's a bit of the Rubila show for the next couple of items. I think you're front and centre. So over to you, Rubila.
Thank you. This is a short paper. We've been taking a paper to this committee for quite a few committees now, but this is a short paper just to say where we are at the moment. We have received Secretary of State's approval for the new PSA. That new PSA enables the introduction of the new methodology. So we've now gone out to PSA holders with their indicative charges for 2005-06. Of the 42 so far, we have had around 20 positive responses. So what I mean by positive responses is some of them have actually already signed the form PSA and brought it back to us and sent it back to us, and about 5 and about 15 have given us a positive response by email that they are going to be looking to sign the PSA. In addition, DfT are instructing the operators that they work with that they very much encourage those operators to sign the new PSA, which will enable the new methodology. So in terms of, we are still looking at the old methodology just in case for 2005-06 charges. So obviously we do need to have those ready if we don't get enough numbers to sign the new PSA. But there's early indications of that we will have enough numbers, and the plan is to come back to members probably early January, when we'll have at least 50% of the impacted PSA holders have signed and returned the new PSA. Stuart, you're on. You haven't got your mute on.
What was that?
It was somebody. It was Stuart. Just don't have the mute on.
Anything else you want to add on that?
That's it.
People content to know that?
Ravila, can I just ask a question? Do they have an opportunity to say, we don't, I know we've had this PSA debate about whether we can change it. Have they got an opportunity to say, we don't agree, we have to stop, or have they done enough now to be able to say this is another way we're going to charge? Have you got Secretary of State approval?
So the ones who have come back to us with some questions we are in discussions with at the moment. I mean, hopefully, after those discussions, they will still sign it, but obviously they do have the chance to say that they may choose not to sign it. Then we have to think about what to do next. But at the moment, the vast majority are looking to sign it, and it's only a few who have just asked questions. Actually, they've not necessarily said anything, but they definitely won't sign it. They're just asking questions at the moment.
Anybody else?
Well, I mean, I should clarify, because I guess the implication of the paper and what Ravila said is if we get more than half the signatures, then we'll recommend to you that we proceed and use the new model, and that may well be the case. But every individual entity who doesn't sign the new agreement could challenge us legally or otherwise, that we're operating an agreement they haven't signed. So it will be a judgment as to who hasn't signed, why they haven't signed, to be frank, what their constitution is. Are they actually part of the department, or are they entirely a private entity? So there will be a judgment for you to make, but hopefully it will be simple enough that we'll give it to you in correspondence early in January. And I do believe, as well as it catches my eye, there really is a benefit for the force in here somewhere if we get us over the line in terms of some of the data your teams currently keep, they will no longer need to keep.
Yeah, simplification is all the order of the day, I think. Could we move on to the BTPA Code of Governance changes, Ravila?
Okay. So we normally do an annual refresh of the Code of Governance in June. However, there has been some recent issues that have shown that there needs to be more clarification in the Code of Governance around particularly the procurement and the capital delegations, and when they need to go to the different level of authority. In addition, we did think it was also about time to look at how to maybe do it slightly differently, so that not everything that goes over a certain level comes back to that particular level of authority, to just free up space, and especially for like some of the more kind of smaller ones. So we've been working quite closely with the force on this, and we've done on the wording of what to go in the Code of Governance, which has been agreed between us, but we've also gone through quite a few different examples, so it's very clear what is meant by this. And the examples aren't here, but we have been going through them with the force, and there's just a few more questions on them before they are then issued by the force to the various budget holders and project holders, etc. But what we're asking for here is just for approval for the amendments, which are in blue, with the strike throughs for what will be deleted. I mean, it does look quite complicated, and that's why we did do examples to make sure that everyone understood what was going to occur. But what it does allow is more agile working, and for less of the kind of the smaller approvals needing to go to the authority or to Hugh.
Can I just ask before I open this to questions, are we content that the proposals for change are in accordance with best practice public sector?
So we haven't necessarily gone straight back to best practice public sector, but what we have done is gone to principles of being proportionate, being agile working, and we haven't necessarily gone to say where the approvals, say for MOPAC and how they do their approvals, but we generally always have oversight. And for example, you'll remember, I think a year or two ago, we changed the capital delegation limits for the Chief Constable, and we've looked at how that's kind of worked since that change has occurred, and there's been nothing for us to feel that there's been any issues arising from having those changed delegation limits. And I think when we did that paper, we did actually come back with some examples about how different delegations work elsewhere. So while we haven't done that example this time, we do still feel that the Chief Exec and the full authority will have appropriate oversight at certain levels, but allowing the Chief Constable to have a bit more freedom.
Okay, thank you. Kenna.
I wonder if we need to insert the word forecast cost or forecast contract value in here in a few places, because what we want to know is that at the first point that the force is forecasting to go above the threshold, that's where they need to seek approval, rather than when the contract is about to breach the threshold. I think there's an important timing issue here. So if they know they're likely to incur costs to bring a contract over the threshold at a point, they need to come to us, and at the moment it kind of implies it's when you're about to reach it.
Yeah.
So I think you maybe need to look at how you can insert that timing forecast word in somewhere.
Yeah. Okay, that's fine. I think we can work with the thoughts on that. That sounds.
Fiona.
Mine's a very tactical point. So it says any contract that breaches the £1 million threshold of a chief executive must go to the chief executive for approval.
So yeah,
so should I say chief constable, because otherwise it's huge. Yeah. It goes above his threshold, so I think it should say chief constable.
Yeah, we've got to do some kind of wording on that. That's fine.
The same in the next paragraph.
Yeah,
it's obviously
it says chief executive.
Yeah. You can check your own homework.
Yeah.
So I've read it, and I'm quite concerned actually, purely because I think it's far too complicated, and I'm also further concerned that you've got to do examples, because when you start getting into examples, then to me that's something clearly is wrong. It can be far simpler than what is being proposed here. I can't support what is written here, because it could be far simpler. You're getting into examples, then you're relying on people understanding those examples, you're relying on corporate memory. It needs to be short, it needs to be sharp, it needs to be easily understood. And to me, I've seen this happen before. We will come into a situation where there will be governance issues because people don't understand what's going on.
I'd suggest we're actually there already, because that's actually why we're introducing this, is because we have had in the current code of governance areas where there were difference of interpretations and clarification was needed, and that's why we're trying to make it clearer. In terms of the examples, I think once those examples are embedded and people have a reference material, then I don't think you necessarily get into that situation of, even with turnover, that people won't necessarily understand it. And we will, I mean, I don't know what the force will say, but my understanding of the force is that they will have people within the force who are kind of, subject matter experts about how this will work, and people can refer to those people and say, this is what we think this delegation means, can you check to the head of the DD of procurement and the finance as well.
Yeah, but it can be far simpler. So you could have anything over 500,000, any type of variation, irrespective of value, up to £1 billion will come to the chief exec. So each and every time there's a variation, and if it's above £1 million, then it goes to the full authority. That's all that needs to happen. All this stuff, I don't think is required.
So the reason why I've done that is because we were finding some of the changes and the variations were very small numbers, say 5,000, etc. And at that point, do we really want to refer
back to the full authority, or do we really want to refer back to the chief exec for something that's quite small? And that's actually what we've been finding very recently.
Steph?
So I think absolutely, I definitely share your concern, and that was the kind of our starting position. I think that's been quite a helpful point of challenge between Rubina and I and our teams as we've worked up to this point. Good governance lives through its simplicity, and so I need project managers to really understand this who don't do it that frequently. And I think it does seem fairly complicated, but I think we've reached a position where I think it's incumbent on us to make sure people do understand it. And we do have tripwires internally to make sure things are picked up at the right level. So I think with a bit of investment in the kind of the masterclass approach and bringing it to life for people, we can do it. I think what we had previously was fairly ambiguous in the code and it left it open to people's interpretation. So I think the onus is on us to help educate people at all levels of the force to make sure they do understand it, and we will work together on those examples. But I think the proposed approach just gives slightly more sensitivity to the proportionate changes on those high value contracts that otherwise, if you stick with specific values, as Rubila said, you end up going very, very frequently for things that don't have much of a significant impact. So I think we've got to a position where we think it's just about understandable with a little bit of work, and we'll work to support the development of the examples.
Put it in a table and it'll look less complicated.
Yeah.
Yes, subject to a review to make sure that it is actually working.
I think, yeah, I think that's fine. That's what we did last time when we increased the capital delegation of the Chief Constable. So I think we can maybe come back in a year and see how it's going.
Yeah, sometime like after next year.
And we can finalise the table point in
Yeah.
Tuesday.
Are we content to accept the proposed changes? Yep. Thank you very much. Thanks, Rubila. And now we come on to the Chief Constable's report. Lucy, please.
At the point, I've just put a sweet in my mouth.
I wasn't looking.
Yeah. It'll be a moment for YouTube anyway, but I'm going to take it out because I can't speak. There we go. Another YouTube moment. Okay. So I suppose I wanted to start, we are heading to the festive period of Christmas, which is a really positive time for a lot of people, but I do want to take a moment of reflection for the beginning of a public meeting to say, I did touch on it earlier, since my time as Chief Constable, we've had nearly 1,000 deaths on the railway, and I think this time of year, as other periods of time, but depending on what people's faiths are, it's a really difficult time for a lot of families. And I want to take enough moment to really thank our people in British Transport Police that deal with the fatalities across the network in an absolutely fantastic way and provide exemplary support to the families. And I suppose with that, I also need to take a moment to reflect on the terrible murder of George Ortega. The attack took place on the 4th of December, and sadly he lost his life on the 6th of December. So it's my condolences to his family at this real difficult time. Another one I also wanted to reflect on was the bravery of my officers in Surbiton, which happened weekend before last. The officers were on a counter lines operation, and we had 7 officers injured by 2 suspects with an alkaline solution that was thrown over them, with 2 officers requiring to go to hospital. So I did want to take a moment to thank all of those officers for their bravery and their selflessness really in going out every day to protect the public. It's also with great sadness that I must inform members, which I've reflected in my report, of the death of Claire Hardacre, a manager in our force control room, who sadly passed away on the 7th of November. She went out for a run near her home and was later found collapsed and taken to hospital. Sadly, she passed away on the 9th of November. The news of her death has come as an enormous shock to everyone who knew her and worked with her within BTP. And again, my thoughts are to her family, friends and colleagues at this sad time. Claire was an absolutely exceptional manager, but also a supportive colleague and a treasured friend to many people.
Her dedication, compassion and commitment to supporting the public were evident in everything that she did, and her impact on this organisation will never be forgotten. Ron has touched on our 2 appointments, so we as a team very pleased to welcome Steph into her role on a permanent basis. I think Steph needs no introduction, but also we were delighted to welcome Ian into the Chief Officer Group. And I think what's been really interesting for us is hearing his comparison in terms of the policing that he's used to and in terms of some of the outstanding work that we've been doing in BTP. And of course, Ian, I think it'd be wrong of me not to mention your dad in the public meeting, but your dad worked on the railway for decades, still works to shoot few shifts every month. So it's definitely a part of your family, the railway. So I know that you're delighted to be part of protecting passengers, those who work on the railway, and working to minimise disruption. So I know you've got a lot of pride. On the 20th of October, we also had the terrible incident at Bescot railway station, which was a woman who had been seriously injured and taken to hospital. We took the primacy of that investigation, and after less than 12 hours following the incident, a suspect was arrested and charged with attempted murder and remanded in custody. You will all know, of course, that unfortunately the victim passed away, and the suspect has subsequently been charged with murder, and BTP retains that investigation. We have got the highest number of murders that have taken place in the railway since, I believe, 2019. And with the weekend, I think we now, sadly, we have seen 10 murders in across the railway in this performance year. We also, on the 1st of October, responded to a major incident, which was a low-speed collision involving 2 trains near a village in Wales. I'm not even going to start to pronounce it. Llanbrynmawr, I think it is. Sadly, again, a male passenger died, and a further 15 people were taken to hospital with injuries. And the other incident that I would like to reflect on was on the 2nd of November. There was a complex incident involving a person in a precarious position at Levenshume in the Manchester area. Obviously, this was a critical incident, caused significant disruption as officers worked alongside our Home Office colleagues and Network Rail. There was significant delay. We have had an extensive debrief as a result of that between industry, ourselves and the Home Office colleagues that attended, but that incident alone cost Network Rail 1.7 million in Schedule 8 payments. So we will be capturing the learning and bring that into the National Rail Plan, the 5-point plan, and see how we can help in terms of disruption within the context of previous decision. Our performance has remained a key area of focus for this quarter. So in November, Alistair and I chaired an all-day performance session where we carried out a deep dive into our performance priorities to understand where we needed to drive positive change in reducing disruption, reducing offending and better crime outcomes. We've touched on it earlier in this meeting that Sean and I have attended, I attended Steve Murphy's Rail Performance Board in November, and Sean and I have subsequently been to a separate group to talk about disruption, and I know that Sean and Ian have attended another, the Performance Board at the national level. This is heavily represented by senior leaders from the train operating companies and Network Rail. And I think what is fair for me to say is that I was absolutely struck by the challenge that industry faces to deliver a reliable railway and service free from disruption. 2 of the 5 strategic priorities set by the Secretary of State directly impact on us, and unquestionably performance around trespass needs to improve. Unfortunately, as you've heard, we're not structured to provide the improvements required, but this is what the optimising policing model had sought to address, but you've heard from Alistair that that will no longer be viable. BTP has, as I say, we've recorded 9 murders, 10 now with the tragic incident recently, and we had 17 attempted murders this year, the highest level since 2019. And during the last quarter, 20 offences of rape have been recorded. In terms of our estate, the last working day at Force headquarters at 25 Camden Road was the November the 15th. So a lot of us are working in a hybrid way at the moment until we're able to settle in the new accommodation in Buckingham Palace Road. And work continues to progress at pace. And I'm absolutely really need to call out Steph and her team for the work that they have done in terms of bringing that in on schedule, which I think at one point we were really unsure whether that would indeed be possible. Alongside the BPR programme, we have continued to invest in the wider estate as we remain committed to provide facilities that show our people we care. However, again, you saw in our previous paper the estate work that will stop depending on where the budget settlement was. So in Scotland, we are engaged as well in a forced relocation in Edinburgh, and we're also looking to the future. The lease for Spring House runs out in December 2026. So we will continue to build options for our training estate, including looking at premises that may be available from partners such as TfL. It is our intention that we will bring high-level options to the next Strategy and Planning Committee, as one of the lessons I believe that we learned from BPR is that we need to agree very early on where the location of those premises are likely to be. I suppose I was going to talk about the optimised policing model, but there's probably not too much point talking about that now. So I will move on to just mention about the drones discovery project. Again, we'll have to have a look at the impact of that. You know, we've told you that that will cease, but we were anticipating having our first flight this week, early next week, in terms of proof of concept for beyond visual line of sight. And we were intending to have our flight operations room, which was going to be based in Iverson House, and we had 18 initial hotspot sites across the network which had been identified for the deployment of the drone in a box. But we will bring back, we'll update at one of the committees the implications of that, and we will discuss with Network Rail. In terms of our professional standards, we still continue to have a very firm drive in making it clear what our expectations are in terms of those who work within BTP, how we expect people to behave both within the workplace and off duty. Currently, we've got 32 individuals suspended and a further 25 restricted for professional standards matters. 14 of those, I think it's important to make clear, are officers who are suspended for 2 WhatsApp investigations, and hearings will take place in January in relation to them. This quarter, several ministerial meetings to discuss BTP and government priorities, ministerially with Lord Henby and with Jess Phillips, and I've touched on the round table chaired by the Prime Minister, where he reiterated his focus to halve violence against women and girls and knife-enabled crime over the next 10 years. The Prime Minister, it's fair to say, was extremely pleased to hear about our successful relaunch of 61016, our OP charge initiative and the high visibility patrols that will be at transport hubs in the run-up to Christmas. And of course, Alistair and Ron attended the knife-enabled robbery knife crime task force meeting, which was chaired by the Home Secretary in October. At that, Alistair, I think you took the opportunity to raise the importance of county lines. I know we've not touched on that, but that is unfunded as we approach April, and therefore we have quite a significant funding pressure. I think the money's roughly about £4 million a year, but at the moment I am concerned that after the 31st of March that we have no funding for our team, and therefore we will have a considerable funding pressure. In terms of the workplace, through the all people calls, line managers calls, concessionary travel remains one of the most important issues for our people. It's regularly raised during visits and those engagement sessions. And following feedback from last year's All People survey, it's fair to say that I think we've seismically improved our recognition offering. This year we received 411 nominations, which covered 800 of our people for the Us at Our Best awards, and we continue with regularity to have our long service awards and commendation ceremonies, which I give out, but also there's a lot of local recognition of our people. But ultimately, I think people just like to sometimes just receive acknowledgement from a colleague that they've actually done a really good job. That's it, Ron. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before I throw it open to any questions or points, Lucy, I'd just like to associate authority members with the comments you made about colleagues lost and the incidents which have occurred. Some of them have been absolutely appalling, and I know that the men and women of the force and the civilian staff who support them do a heck of a good piece of work in terms of protecting the railway and the people who travel on and work on it. So all kudos to those individuals for their courage and professionalism. Does anybody have any questions or points they wish to make of the Chief Constable? Let's take Andy first, then Emir.
I just wanted to pick up in your section 10 there, the technology projects which are now coming to fruition and are actually being closed now, which is always nice to hear on the project. I mean, we talk about multi-year settlements. We started funding this 2.5 to 3 years ago. From the discussions I've had with the team, they've managed where costs are likely to go up, they've managed things down and done alternative things. They've delivered on all the benefits that were quoted at the start, I think, and they've produced some good updates, I think, at various meetings. You know, and here is some spend that's producing benefits, you know, cash benefits as well as benefits in performance of the service, and really it needs to be noted because we don't have many projects that go for 3 years and we actually see the end of it, and it's a roaring success. You know, and without, when we came to that day, wondering whether we needed an IT supremo at a time when actually it was fixing the more basic things in there, and we took the right decision in the end, not appointing anybody, and look at the success we've had. I think it's just great.
I mean, I think they're a prime example of where we've invested in and they've been able to realise benefits. So, you know, we have invested a lot of money, but it is paying itself back. They, in effect, if I take you back to the chart, they're the top box. I mean, you know, the settlement doesn't even take us out of price and pay, so that's the top box that will go, unfortunately. But you're absolutely right, and you know, you had a presentation at last committee from Caroline, and I think there's fantastic work by our technology team. You know, it's difficult in any police force around securing investment for technology, but to actually deliver that over 3 countries, I think is fantastic. Over roughly 150 locations is outstanding.
And I think it picks up Paula's earlier point, you know, the cyber threat. We are in a much better position on a number of those things than we were 2.5 years ago as a result of their work. So, can I have another one, if I just may? On the county lines, shouldn't we at this stage assume that we're not going to get funding and plan how we're going to redeploy those resources?
Well, we can do, but there's nowhere to redeploy them. If you look at where our settlement is, so they're always going to be over the number, so it's always going to be a cost pressure. And you know, I've made it clear previously that, you know, if the investment isn't there, then our work in that area will come back to being actioned on a risk-based process that we did before county lines. So it'll be intelligence-led. I mean, obviously there's still some stuff that we can't deal with, but we can't consume those amount of people for redeployment because, as I say, we've got to exit 300 people from the organisation. There are another 50 to 60 on top of that.
Can I just turn that round and say to you, Lucy, as Chief Constable, you need to tell us what support you want in terms of squeezing that money, repeat money out of the Home Office. We'll do anything that you think is appropriate in order to support that, because they do I don't know how many of you have been out with the county lines now, but they're very impressive, do a fantastic job. Charlie.
So I've got a call, a meeting with the National League tomorrow to have that discussion around continued funding. We have sort of slightly shifted their view from the previous government's perspective to the sort of Safer Streets initiative, so we're trying to sort of shift or widen, broaden their deployment options. So I wouldn't say I'm confident or hopeful that we will at least see a further year. We may not see beyond that. We may not get a full year, so I'll know more tomorrow, but yes, I will take it.
If you need any support, Charlie,
thank you, Chair.
Emir, you had a question?
Yeah, Lisa, just on 10.3, you talked about the print management project, and would we have an aspiration like the Department for Business and Trade, where we will go no paper at all and just make it raw?
Yeah. I mean, there is still some stuff we have to print out, you know, from an inclusive perspective. There is things, but I mean, most people are pretty much moved towards, you know, as we see the laptops roll out, they're intrinsically linked in terms of
Alistair's face.
Intrinsically linked towards, being paperless. But, there is an inclusion aspect that for some people that's not the right solution.
Paula.
Lucy, you talked, sorry, caught me with that.
I've been working on this all day.
I'm not going to be able to elegantly spit it out in so much. You've talked a bit about a digitally enabled force.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I fully understand, maybe that's because I'm still relatively new to this, what that is and how far we are down that path, how much more you've got to go. So I know we've got a number of different projects, but is there merit to you bringing back to the authority a kind of overall picture on what a digitally enabled force looks like?
Yeah, I mean, we could probably aim to bring some. I mean, I think we've got to look at where we are, following today. So we've got to deal with that as a challenge. I think we could probably, maybe not the next authority meeting, but after that, we could definitely present this is what it could look like, yes, with the appropriate investment. And I think it's from crime fighting right the way through to our commercial services, some of the stuff. So, I'm less convinced about the need to collaborate HR departments as people talk about. I'm actually more interested in how technology can enable recruitment, and I think a lot of that can become, from a machine learning and an AI perspective, actually, the future. We can see the good practice in the commercial sector. Actually, we should be pushing there. So I think, recruitment is an area. Crime fighting, there's a lot of work that's taking place. So, I mean, it would probably be good if you could come in and we can show you some of the stuff that we're looking at. I think if you look at, some of the work that we're doing with TfL at the moment, which is looking at lost property and reconciling it with our crime system. Some people think it's been stolen, but it's probably sitting in the TfL. Lost property. There's some of that. And then I think in terms of we talked a little bit last night just in terms of crime recording, how could we have an aspiration to move that to a point in time where actually that's more of an automated process. So it's a rules-based system. So there's lots of exciting opportunities. We've got 2 projects that are underway. We had suggested to industry that we would look at how we could use data in a better way in terms of trespass to actually enforce trespass, because at the moment we're very reliant on somebody telling us about a trespass, but how could we use technology to identify that and then bring a fine? And I know people do say about the fine not being expensive. I think if you look at the average pay in the UK, which is in the sort of low 20,000s, £1,000 fine is still a lot of money, but the courts, as Alistair rightly said, aren't pushing that. But I think we could use technology differently. So we could bring it back in those categories, and I would pop data. It's digital and data and technology, and we can bring
and
that through that.
of over time, which would be prioritised, but also those that are within the forces capability and our capability, and those that require partners to find. I think understanding that as well gives us a sense of how quickly we can move on something.
And there's lots of exciting things. There's, I would say one that policing is keen to push, nationally very quickly is redaction. So redaction in terms of court processes is quite a manual process, and I think, Ian probably knows a lot more about this, but there's definitely opportunities in terms of those areas where we can, deliver a better service, but potentially in a different way through technology.
Okay, anybody else? So can we note the Chief Constable's report? Thank you very much, Hugh.
Chair, can I, we're an hour and 20 minutes late on the agenda and 5 items. Can I make a suggestion with your agreement, and apologies to Hugh, but when we finish lunch, our lunch break, whenever that is, can we go into the private session? Because I do think there are important issues of policy and finance.
I'm conscious to do that.
I was just going to say, the others are important, but they're more routine, and I do think I want to hear the debate on that.
Yeah, that's fine.
If you're in agreement with that. And
good point.
You.
Well, I was just going to take about half an hour of my report. So I will leave it as read. No, I won't. So the first paragraph is paragraphs 2 are about police reform and rail reform.
We've talked about them a little bit in a meeting so far. As it happens, both are currently due a white paper in the spring, so you will find out more about the shape and plan size of GBR in a white paper in the spring, and the same is also said by the Home Office in terms of police landscape reform. Both are relevant to us. I hope that we will be able to take some time at the end of January when members get together for Development Day, actually to focus mainly on where those things are going to move to and to give members a chance to contribute. So that's one thing to lodge in your mind. The second thing, I'm just going to mention that we're asking you to ratify a correspondence address of Ebury Bridge, because we did that before, and I don't think you'll have any problem with that. But we will come back to you and ask you to ratify Buckingham Palace Road by March.
Okay. Any points for Hugh? Right, can I quickly just go through the committee minutes, and I'm assuming everybody has read all the minutes, and if you have any points or questions you can ask the relevant chair. So can I take it in turn? Finance, legitimacy and performance. Craig?
They're there for the thing. I don't intend to highlight anything, probably should see them.
Content to note?
Yes.
People committee? Nick?
Only one thing to raise, Chair, and that's you tasked us with looking at the temporary duty restrictions. We as a committee feel we've done that. We've been given the assurance we felt we needed, so we think we've discharged our duty, and I wanted to report back that unless you task us to keep going, we recommend we close that one down.
That's
we
fine.
don't require or invite further reports.
Thanks, Nick. Anyone any points for Nick?
No.
Thank you. Strategy, Andy?
Yeah, I mean, most of the items that we had on the agenda for the last meetings are reflected in today's agenda for the authority, because there were papers coming on. The only point to note is we had a much better paper from a lengthy paper from Rubila this time, the one that was on the agenda. So nothing really to raise because it's all picked up here today.
Thanks, Andy. Anyone? No. Points, questions? No, thank you. Audit, Kenna?
Nothing to add other than what's in the minutes.
Okay, thank you. Content. SRPC, Ian?
Probably we had a presentation on disruption. We endorsed the policing plan in regard to Scotland, and on our work, our evaluation framework, we are looking to align that with our best value approach, which is a Scottish approach to showing that we are providing value in terms of the wider public sector. So we look to bring that forward in future meetings.
Okay, thanks. Anyone any points or questions? Content to note? Thank you. Do you want to deal with the work plan, Hugh?
Only just to say it's there, and comments are welcome either now or in correspondence to answer.
Okay, thank you very much. Does anybody wish to raise any other business in public?
No.
Okay, I've got one item I'd like to raise. This, as some of you may be aware, is Willie's last appearance as an authority member, as he leaves us very early next year, and we go out with the horrendous task of trying to replace him with somebody of equal calibre. But Willie and I have worked together now for the best part of 7 years, I think.
Yeah.
And certainly I have valued Willie's counsel, and he has worked very hard for or on behalf of the authority. We're very grateful to you for what you've done, and we will sorely miss you, I think, going forward. So whatever it is you decide to do next, and I'm sure your name will pop up somewhere in the near future.
I can assure you, it won't.
That's a choice.
I have no desire and no intent to do anything other than play with my grandkids.
Well, that's a laudable wish, and on behalf of authority members, Willie, I'd just like to present you with this.
I've got you on that.
Unless you want to say anything, Willie.
No.
Okay, can I formally move now for the exclusion of the public? Yeah. Thank you. Lunch, I think, Alistair? Lunch.
So lunch is served through in the restaurant area.
What time do you want us back?
Coming back.